Hello everyone, and welcome back to Sleepy Scares. I know many of you tune in to unwind and drift off into a peaceful sleep, so before you settle in, I'd love for you to drop a comment, letting me know where in the world you're listening from. If you're enjoying the episodes, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Now, let's get cozy, relax, and dive right in. Story 1. I never believed in the supernatural. Ghost stories were nothing but fodder for late-night campfire tales, and haunted houses were just poorly maintained properties with creaking floorboards and a few strategically placed cobwebs. That was until I inherited my grandmother's old house, a Victorian relic hidden in the woods, shrouded in a veil of mist and memories I had long since tried to forget. The first night in the house was unsettling, to say the least. I stood in the grand foyer, the air heavy with dust and the scent of mildew. The wallpaper, peeling and faded, seemed to whisper secrets of the past. Shadows danced along the walls as I flicked on the light, revealing a staircase that spiraled up into darkness. I shivered, not from the chill of the air, but from an inexplicable sense of dread that swelled within me. Just an old house, I muttered, trying to convince myself. Nothing to be afraid of. As I wandered through the rooms, I could feel the weight of history pressing against me. Each room told a story, but none were welcoming. The kitchen was a graveyard of rusted utensils and a fridge that hummed a low, menacing tune. I opened the door, and the sound echoed through the empty space. Creak. Inside, a faint light flickered from a window, casting long shadows that seemed to crawl toward me. I slammed the fridge shut, the noise reverberating through the silence with a resounding thud. My heart raced. I needed to get my bearings. Outside, the wind howled, and the trees swayed like ancient guardians. I stepped out onto the porch, the wood groaning beneath my weight. The moon hung low, illuminating a path that led deeper into the woods. I could hear the distant rustle of leaves, punctuated by an occasional snap of a twig. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. "Is anyone there?" Silence. Just the whisper of the wind and the soft thud of my heart echoing in my ears. As I turned to head back inside, a low moan pierced the air. It was an unnatural sound, like the groan of a dying animal, and it sent chills racing down my spine. I peered into the darkness, squinting to see what lurked beyond the trees. My instincts screamed at me to retreat, but curiosity tugged me forward. "Get a grip," I said, more to myself than anyone else. "It's just the wind." But it wasn't just the wind. The moan came again, closer this time, and I felt a jolt of fear. I dashed back inside, slamming the door behind me. The old wood shuddered under the impact, and I leaned against it, breathless. Okay, I panted, trying to calm myself. "It's just an old house." Yet, as I walked through the dimly lit halls, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The air felt thick, charged with energy. I could almost hear the house breathing. I decided to explore the upstairs, where the moans seemed to echo more. Each step on the staircase was a creak, a reminder of the age of the house and its many secrets. I reached the second floor and found myself in a long hallway lined with doors. I pushed open the first door, revealing a dusty bedroom. The bed was unmade, sheets yellowed with age, and a rocking chair sat in the corner, slowly swaying as if someone had just left it. "Ugh, gross," I muttered, stepping back. I turned to leave when I caught a glimpse of something in the corner of my eye. A figure, pale and translucent, flickering in the gloom. I blinked, and it was gone. Okay, This is ridiculous, I said, shaking my head. Just my imagination. Then I heard it again, a soft hum, melodic and haunting. It drifted through the air, wrapping around me like a cold embrace. I followed the sound, drawn to the end of the hallway where a door stood slightly ajar. "Hello," I called again, my voice wavering. No response, just the hum, growing louder, more insistent. I pushed the door open, and it swung wide with a creak, revealing a small room filled with dust-covered furniture. In the center stood a mirror, its surface tarnished and cracked, reflecting a distorted image of myself. I took a step closer, compelled by an unseen force, when the hum morphed into a low, chilling laugh. It echoed around me, filling the room with a malevolence that sent a jolt of fear through my veins. "Who's there?" I shouted, backing away, but the laugh only grew louder, mocking me. "Stop it! Just stop!" I cried, panic rising in my throat. Suddenly, the reflection in the mirror shifted. Instead of my own face, a girl with hollow eyes and a twisted smile stared back at me. "You shouldn't have come here," she whispered, her voice a chilling breeze that made my skin crawl. "You're not welcome." I stumbled back, my heart racing. "What do you want from me?" I screamed, the walls reverberating with my fear. She leaned closer to the mirror, her fingers stretching toward me, but the glass felt cold and unyielding. "The house needs you," she hissed, the laughter returning, echoing in a cacophony of madness. I spun around, desperate to escape, but as I reached for the door, it slammed shut with a bang. The sound reverberated through the room, and the air grew thick with despair. "Let me out," I screamed, pounding on the door. "Please!" The laughter intensified, a chorus of voices joining in, mocking my terror. "You're one of us now," they chanted, the sound wrapping around me like chains. I turned back to the mirror, the girl's face now twisted in rage. "You think you can leave?" she shrieked, the sound so piercing it made my ears ring. "You're trapped!" Panic surged through me as I frantically searched for a way out. I grabbed a nearby chair and hurled it at the door, but it bounced off harmlessly, the thud barely registering in my mind. The laughter echoed, drowning out my desperation. With a surge of adrenaline, I turned back to the mirror. "What do you want?" I shouted, my voice hoarse. "Your soul," she replied, her smile widening, revealing jagged teeth. "You must join us in the darkness." "No," I screamed, the word tearing from my throat. "I won't." In that moment, something snapped. The energy in the room shifted, and I felt a surge of defiance. "You can't have me," I shouted, lunging forward, hands pressed against the cold glass. The laughter faltered, and for a brief moment, the girl's expression changed, surprise flickering in her hollow eyes. I grasped that moment, pushing against the mirror with all my strength, and to my shock, it rippled like water under my touch. With a final scream, I hurled myself against the mirror, and everything erupted into chaos. The glass shattered, shards flying in every direction, and I felt myself being pulled through, the darkness swallowing me whole. I awoke on the floor of the small room, gasping for breath. The air was still, the laughter gone, replaced by the soft thump of my heart. The mirror lay shattered around me, reflecting the remnants of light from the room. I scrambled to my feet, heart pounding, and bolted toward the door. This time it swung open easily, and I dashed down the hallway, the oppressive weight of the house lifting with each step. I burst into the foyer, the front door looming ahead. I could hear the wind outside, the trees whispering a warning. "Get out!" I shouted to myself, urging my legs to move faster. I flung the door open and the cool night air rushed in, wrapping around me like a lifeline. I stumbled onto the porch, gasping for fresh air. But as I turned back to the house, I saw it. The window of the room I had escaped from, now eerily clear. The girl stood there, her face pressed against the glass, a twisted grin stretching across her lips. "Come back anytime," she mouthed, her laughter resonating in the night, echoing through the trees. I turned away, running into the woods, heart racing, knowing that the house would always be there, waiting. A dark specter in the shadows of my mind, and as I fled, the laughter followed, a haunting reminder that some doors, once opened, can never truly be closed. Story 2. The granite giant stood sentinel against the relentless assault of the sea. The North Point Lighthouse, with its single, unwavering eye, had been Elias Thorne's solitary companion for the last 5 years. He was a man of routine, of the rhythmic sweep of the beam across the churning waters, the gruff greetings of the gulls, and the comforting groan of the aging structure in the teeth of a storm. He preferred the company of the wind and the waves to the chattering crowds of the mainland. He believed in the light, in its power to guide and to warn. Until tonight, the first anomaly was subtle. A shift in the air, a prickle on the back of his neck that had nothing to do with the damp chill seeping through the thick stone walls. He was meticulously polishing the Fresnel lens, its intricate glass prisms gleaming under his lamp, when he heard it. A whisper. It was faint, almost swallowed by the roar of the surf crashing against the rocks below. He paused, rag still in hand, and listened intently. Nothing. He told himself it was the wind playing tricks, the mournful sigh of the tower itself. He returned to his task, but the unease lingered, a tiny seed of disquiet planted in the fertile ground of his isolation. The whispers grew bolder over the next few hours. They weren't words, not exactly, more like the susurrus of dry leaves blown across a graveyard, or the sibilant hiss of escaping steam. They seemed to emanate from the very fabric of the lighthouse, from the cold stone and the creaking timbers. He found himself turning his head sharply, convinced something, was nearby, just out of sight. He checked the logbook, his handwriting neat and precise, detailing the wind speed, visibility, and sea conditions every hour. He even added a note about the strange sounds, dismissing it as possible auditory distortion due to prolonged isolation. He didn't believe it himself. Then came the cold spots, patches of air, several degrees colder than the surrounding chill, that moved and shifted like unseen currents. One moment he'd be wrapping his hands around a mug of hot tea. The next, a wave of icy air would wash over him, raising gooseflesh on his arms. He tried rationalizing in drafts, unusual air currents, but the cold felt different, almost purposeful. That night, sleep eluded him. The whispers intensified, weaving themselves into his thoughts, a chorus of unseen voices murmuring secrets he couldn't understand, but instinctively fear. He lay in his narrow bed, listening to the rhythmic sweep of the light, usually a comforting lullaby, now a frantic beacon in the encroaching darkness. He rose before dawn, his body heavy with fatigue and a growing sense of dread. As he descended the winding stairs, his hand brushed against something unexpectedly cold and slick on the stone wall. He recoiled, his heart hammering in his chest. In the dim light, he saw it, a patch of viscous, dark slime, glistening faintly. It had no smell, no discernible origin. He scrubbed at it frantically with a cloth, but it seemed to smear and spread, leaving a faint, greasy residue. The following days were a descent into a private hell. The whispers became clearer, more insistent, sometimes sounding like his own name being called, sometimes devolving into guttural growls and hisses. The cold spots became more frequent, lingering longer, sometimes forming the vague impression of human shapes. The slime appeared in new places, on the railings, on the lens housing, even on his own boots. Elias started seeing things in the periphery of his vision, fleeting shadows that darted behind machinery, glimpses of movement in the corners of his eye. He'd whirl around, heart pounding, but there was never anything there. He questioned his sanity, wondering if the years of solitude had finally cracked his mind. He tried to focus on his duties, meticulously maintaining the lamp, cleaning the tower, anything to occupy his thoughts and distract him from the growing terror. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of blood orange and bruised purple, he saw it clearly. Standing at the foot of the stairs, just beyond the reach of the lamplight, was a figure, tall and gaunt, its silhouette indistinct against the deepening gloom. He froze, breath caught in his throat. He strained his eyes, trying to make out details, but the shadows seemed to writhe around it, obscuring its form. It didn't move, didn't speak. It simply stood there, an ominous presence in the heart of his sanctuary. He found his voice, a shaky rasp. "Who's there?" Silence. Only the relentless roar of the sea answered him. He took a hesitant step forward, his hand trembling as he reached for the lantern hanging on the wall. As the light fell upon the spot, the figure was gone. But the cold remained, a tangible presence that seemed to cling to the air. Fear solidified into a cold knot in his stomach. This wasn't his imagination. This was real. Something was with him in the lighthouse. He started locking the doors and windows, a futile gesture against an unseen enemy. He spent the nights huddled in the lamp room. The bright light his only solace. The rhythmic sweep of the beam his only companion. But even the light felt less powerful now. Struggling against the encroaching darkness, the whispers grew louder, coalescing into words, fragmented phrases whispered just beyond the threshold of understanding. He heard his wife's name, a name he hadn't spoken aloud in years. He heard pleas for help, followed by chilling laughter. One night, as a ferocious storm raged outside, rattling the very foundations of the lighthouse, he saw them clearly. They weren't human. They were gaunt and stretched, their limbs impossibly long and thin, their skin a pale, almost translucent white, their eyes, wide and black, reflected no light, only an endless void. They moved with a jerky, unnatural gait, gliding more than walking, their bare feet making no sound on the stone floor. They appeared in the corners of the lamp room, their forms flickering in and out of existence, as if struggling to maintain a presence in this realm of light. They reached for him with their long skeletal fingers, their touch radiating an intense, bone-chilling cold. He screamed, a primal sound ripped from his throat, and lunged for the lamp controls. He cranked the brightness to its maximum, flooding the room with searing light. The figures recoiled, hissing and shrinking back into the shadows. The light was a barrier, it seemed, a temporary reprieve, but he knew it wouldn't last. The storm outside was their ally, its darkness pulling at the edges of the light, weakening its hold. He could feel their presence growing stronger, their whispers turning into mocking laughter. He barricaded the door to the lamp room with everything he could find. Toolboxes, spare parts, even his own bed. He knew it was a futile effort, a delaying tactic in a losing battle. As the night wore on, the storm reached its peak. Waves crashed against the lighthouse with the force of a battering ram, shaking the structure to its core. The wind howled like a banshee, drowning out the whispers for a brief respite. But then, he heard a new sound, a scraping, scratching noise coming from the walls, from the floorboards, even from the thick glass of the lamp housing. They were getting in. He huddled in the center of the room, the light his only shield, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He knew this was the end. The isolation that had once been his solace had become his prison. The light he had dedicated his life to maintaining was flickering, its power waning against the encroaching darkness. The scraping grew louder, more insistent. A long skeletal finger poked through a crack in the floorboards, its nails sharp and black. He recoiled, a whimper escaping his lips. Then, the door shuddered. The makeshift barricade groaned under the pressure. He could hear them on the other side, their whispers a triumphant chorus. The door splintered. A section of wood flew inward, revealing one of the figures, its black eyes fixed on him, its mouth stretched into a silent, horrifying grin. He closed his eyes, bracing for the inevitable. He thought of his wife, of the life he had left behind, of the comforting rhythm of the light that had once been his sanctuary. The light flickered, then died. The whispers enveloped him, cold and triumphant. The last sound the storm carried away was a long, drawn-out scream, swallowed by the roar of the sea. The North Point lighthouse stood silent against the dawn. The storm had passed, leaving behind a tranquil sea and a clear sky. The light was dark, and the whispers had finally found their voice. They were the susurrus of the sea, the sigh of the wind, and the silent promise echoing across the waves that even in the brightest light, the darkness waits. Story 3. The night air hung thick with tension, a palpable dread that settled over the abandoned cabin like a shroud. I pushed the door open, its creak slicing through the silence, a sound so loud it startled me. Creak, it echoed, as though warning me to turn back, but curiosity pulled me inside, urging me to explore the decaying remnants of what might have once been a home. Dust motes danced in the beam of my flashlight, swirling like lost souls. I stepped further in, the wooden floorboards groaning beneath my weight. Creak, crack. Each sound felt amplified in the stillness. I shivered, unsure if it was the chill of the night or something more sinister. The air smelled stale, mingled with an earthy dampness that suggested it had been years since anyone had set foot here. Hello? My voice trembled, swallowed by the darkness. I felt foolish, talking to the shadows, but the emptiness begged for company. Anyone there? Silence answered, thick and suffocating. I moved deeper into the cabin, the beam of my flashlight sweeping across the room. The walls, once painted a cheerful yellow, were peeling and faded, revealing the raw wood underneath. A moth fluttered past, its wings a soft whisper against the stillness. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that something lurked just beyond the flickering light. The kitchen was a pitiful sight. Rusted pots and pans hung from the wall, and the old table, stained and warped, stood defiantly in the middle of the room. I ran my fingers over its surface, feeling the ridges of long-dried spills. A shiver ran down my spine. What happened here? I murmured to myself. As I turned to leave, a sharp thud echoed from the back of the cabin. My heart raced, pounding against my ribs. Thud! Thud! I froze, listening intently. Was it just the wind, or something more? The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. Is anyone there? I called out again, my voice shaking. Ignoring the instinct to flee, I edged toward the source of the sound. I found myself in a narrow hallway, the walls closing in around me. As I walked, the floor creaked ominously beneath me. I reached the end of the hallway and peered into a small room. The moonlight filtered through a grimy window, illuminating an old rocking chair that creaked back and forth as if someone had just gotten up from it. A chill ran through me. Stop it, I whispered, trying to quell the rising panic. You're imagining things, but the creaking continued, rhythmic and mocking. It's just an old chair, I told myself, but doubt gnawed at my mind. Suddenly, a low moan echoed from the shadows, a sound so anguished it sent ice through my veins. Ooh. The noise seemed to come from the adjoining room. I hesitated, caught between fear and curiosity. Is someone hurt? I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. With every step, the floorboards protested. Creak, crack. I rounded the corner and found myself in a dimly lit room. The air was thick, almost suffocating, and the smell of decay lingered in the corners. My flashlight flickered, casting eerie shadows that danced along the walls. There in the corner lay a figure huddled beneath a tattered blanket. "Please," it rasped, a voice so weak it made my heart ache. "Help me." I took a cautious step closer, my instinct screaming at me to run. "What happened to you?" I asked, although I could barely muster the courage to speak. The figure shifted, revealing a gaunt face, hollow eyes peering out from under the fabric. "Help. I can't move," it whispered, desperation lacing its tone. "Please." I knelt beside it, my heart racing. "What did this to you?" I asked, scanning the room for signs of danger. A rusted blade glinted in the corner, and I swallowed hard, my mind racing with possibilities. "They come at night," the figure rasped. They take... A shiver coursed through me, and I felt a bead of sweat trickle down my back. "You have to leave, now." But something inside me, a morbid curiosity, urged me to stay. "Who takes you?" I pressed, my voice trembling. "What do they want?" They want to feed," it whispered, a look of terror crossing its features. "And they're hungry? Hungry?" I echoed, confusion mixing with fear. "What do you mean?" But before it could answer, a loud crash echoed from the hallway, followed by a sinister whisper that sent my heart into my throat. "Come play with us." I shot to my feet, my breath quickening. "No," I shouted, the panic rising in my chest. I turned to run, but the figure reached out, grabbing my wrist with a grip that felt like ice. "Don't go. You'll be next." I wrenched free, stumbling backward. "Get away from me," I yelled, my voice echoing off the walls. I darted for the door. The sound of laughter, guttural and mocking, chased after me. "Come play! Come play!" I burst into the hallway, my heart racing as I sprinted toward the front door. The laughter echoed behind me, a cacophony of voices, rising and falling in a nightmarish melody. "Come back! We just want to play." I flung the door open, the hinges protesting with a loud creak. As I barreled outside into the moonlight, the cool air hit me like a slap, but the relief was short-lived. The laughter floated through the still night, chilling my blood. "Please, don't go," the figure's voice echoed from within the cabin, desperate and pleading. I hesitated, torn between the urge to flee and the instinct to help. But another crash reverberated through the cabin, followed by a chorus of whispers. "Join us! Join us!" "No!" I shouted, shaking my head as I stumbled backward. "I want!" My foot caught on a root, and I fell to the ground, the impact knocking the breath from my lungs. "Join us!" The laughter continued, growing louder, more frenzied. I scrambled to my feet, heart pounding, and raced toward the tree line that bordered the cabin's clearing. "Help!" I screamed, the word tearing from my throat. "Somebody, help me!" But the forest absorbed my cries, leaving me feeling more alone than ever. I dashed into the trees, branches scratching at my arms and face, my breath coming in frantic gasps. The laughter faded, but the whispers followed, slithering through the air like smoke. "You can't escape." I pushed deeper into the woods, adrenaline surging through me. The ground was uneven, roots twisting beneath my feet as I navigated the darkness. The moon hung high above, casting an eerie glow, illuminating the path ahead. But the shadows felt alive, shifting and twisting as I moved. Suddenly, I stumbled into a clearing, gasping for breath. I turned around, scanning the darkness for any sign of pursuit. The whispers had grown quiet, but my heart thudded violently in my chest. I leaned against a tree, trying to steady myself. "Just breathe," I whispered, clutching my pounding heart. "You're okay." But the forest felt wrong, the air thick with a weight I couldn't shake. I felt like prey, the shadows watching, waiting for the right moment to pounce. A snap of a twig shattered the stillness, and I spun around, my breath hitching in my throat. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice trembling. "Show yourself." A figure emerged from the shadows, a silhouette against the moonlight. A silhouette against the moonlight. "You shouldn't have come here," it said, the voice low and gravelly. "Stay back," I yelled, my instincts screaming at me to run. "Too late for that," the figure said, stepping closer. "They're hungry, and they've set their sights on you." "You're hungry, and they've set their sights on you." I backed away, my pulse quickening. "What do you mean?" "They're always hungry," it continued, a twisted smile spreading across its face. "And once they find you, there's no escaping." I turned to run, but the laughter erupted again, echoing through the trees surrounding me. "Join us! Join us!" Panic surged as I sprinted deeper into the woods, branches clawing at my skin. I could feel them closing in, the shadows stretching and twisting, hungry for my fear. "Help!" I screamed again, but the laughter drowned out my voice. I ran until my legs burned, desperation pushing me forward. The trees blurred, the shadows danced, and I could feel their presence, a darkness that wanted to consume me whole. Suddenly, I stumbled, falling to the ground, breathless. The laughter crescendoed around me, a haunting melody that echoed in my mind. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying for it to stop. "Please, please," I gasped, my voice barely a whisper, and then silence. I opened my eyes, heart racing, and found myself alone in the clearing. The shadows receded, laughter faded into the night. I was left in the stillness, the weight of the darkness pressing down on me. But I knew it was only a matter of time before they returned. The hunger in the night was insatiable, and I was the next course on the menu. Story 4. The biting wind howled like a tortured spirit, rattling the ancient windows of Oakhaven Manor. Inside, nestled deep within the creaking bones of the house, sat Elias Thorne, a man whose heart was a cold, echoing chamber mirroring the manor itself. He was a collector of forgotten things, relics of lives lived and lost, and he had just acquired what he believed was his masterpiece, a tarnished silver locket, rumored to hold the darkness within. The locket was intricate, etched with grotesque faces and twisting vines. It felt heavy in his palm, almost alive. The antique dealer, a man whose eyes darted nervously as he handed over the piece, had warned him. Some things, he'd rasped, his voice like dry leaves skittering across cobblestones, are better left buried, Mr. Thorne. This one, whispers. Elias, a man who scoffed at whispers and ghosts, had merely chuckled. Now, days later, the chuckle felt like a distant, foolish echo. The whispers had begun subtly, a rustling just at the edge of hearing, like fabric dragged across the floorboards in the dead of night. He'd attributed it to the age of the manor, the settling of the timbers, the wind playing tricks. But then the shadows started to move on their own, not dramatically, but imperceptibly, stretching and contorting when he wasn't looking directly at them. A fleeting glimpse of something just out of the corner of his eye, a shape that resolved itself into familiar furniture when he turned his head. He started sleeping with the lights on, a practice he hadn't indulged in since childhood nightmares of monsters under the bed. The locket sat on his mahogany desk, its dull silver surface seeming to absorb the meager light filtering through the grimy windows. He found himself drawn to it, his fingers tracing the disturbing carvings. One night, unable to resist, he'd opened it. Inside, nestled against faded velvet, was a single strand of hair, the color of dried blood. As soon as he opened the locket, the whispers intensified, swirling around him like unseen insects. He felt a chill that went deeper than the November air seeping through the cracks in the walls. He tried to dismiss it, tell himself it was his imagination, fatigue, anything but the truth that was beginning to claw its way into his consciousness. The locket was not just an object, it was a vessel. The dream started soon after, vivid, suffocating nightmares where he was trapped in twisting corridors, the walls lined with whispering mouths. He would wake up gasping for air, the scent of damp earth and decay clinging to his nostrils. He felt watched, a constant heavy presence in the room, even when he was alone. One evening, while examining the locket under the dim light of a kerosene lamp, he noticed something new. One of the grotesque faces etched onto its surface seemed to be subtly different, its eyes slightly wider, its mouth contorted in a silent scream. He blinked, thinking it was a trick of the light, but the change remained. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through his intellectual detachment. This was no ordinary antique. This was something else entirely. The house itself seemed to react to the locket's presence. Doors would creak open and slam shut for no reason. The footsteps echoed in the empty hallways. The temperature would plummet in certain rooms, leaving his breath misting in the air. He tried to remove the locket from the house, packing it into a lead-lined box, but an unseen force seemed to push him back, an invisible barrier preventing him from leaving. He was trapped, not just in the manor, but with the malevolence he had willingly invited inside. He began to research the locket, poring over dusty tomes and obscure texts in his vast library. He discovered fragmented accounts of a dark cult that used such lockets to bind entities from beyond the veil, to anchor them to the mortal realm. The hair inside, he learned with mounting horror, was likely a piece of the sacrifice used in the binding ritual. The entity within the locket, he realized, was not merely whispering. It was communicating, probing his mind, feeding on his fear. He started seeing things more clearly now, fleeting shadows that had substance, whispers that formed coherent words, though he couldn't quite decipher their meaning. They sounded ancient, guttural, like the grinding of stones. The grotesque faces on the locket seemed to shift and writhe constantly now, their silent screams growing more frantic. He could feel their gaze on him, cold and hungry. Sleep became a lugger of Ford. He lived in a state of perpetual dread, his nerves frayed, his mind teetering on the edge of sanity. One night, he awoke to find the locket floating in the air above his bed, the silver gleaming with an unnatural luminescence. The whispers were deafening now, a cacophony of voices all speaking at once, clawing at his consciousness. He tried to scream, but his throat was constricted, his lungs burning for air. He felt a presence in the room, heavier than any physical weight, a cold, suffocating blanket of malevolence. He saw it then, a fleeting glimpse in the corner of his eye, a tall, gaunt figure shrouded in shadow, its eyes glowing with an eerie red light. Panic seized him, a primal fear that stripped away all pretense of rationality. He scrambled out of bed, backing away from the floating locket, his heart hammering against his ribs. He tripped over a rug, falling heavily to the floor. The locket descended slowly, almost deliberately, until it hovered inches above his face. The whispers intensified, coalescing into a single, chilling voice that echoed inside his skull. "You summoned me," it hissed, the voice like the scraping of bone on stone. "Now you will serve." He saw the faces on the locket contort in triumphant grins. The strand of hair inside seemed to writhe like a living thing. He tried to fight, to scream, to claw his way back from the abyss that was opening before him. But his body was leaden, his will extinguished. The darkness enveloped him, cold and absolute. Days later, the antique dealer, his face etched with a morbid curiosity, returned to Oakhaven Manor. He found the house silent, the air thick with a palpable sense of dread. He found Elias Thorne slumped in his study, his eyes wide and vacant, staring at the ceiling. His skin was cold, his body stiff, but there was no sign of struggle. On the desk lay the silver locket, its surface gleaming innocently in the dim light. As the dealer reached for it, he noticed something new. One of the grotesque faces had changed. Its eyes were closed, and a serene, almost peaceful smile played on its lips. And clutched tightly in Elias Thorne's lifeless hand was a single strand of hair, the color of dried blood, now neatly tucked back inside the open locket. The whispers in the manor had ceased, replaced by an unnerving silence. Story 5. The wind howled through the skeletal trees, a mournful sound that seemed to echo the dread creeping into my bones. I stood at the edge of the forest, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The old thornwood forest loomed before me, its gnarled branches twisted like the fingers of long-dead specters reaching for the sky. I had always heard the stories, the whispers of things that waited in the dark, of shadows that moved when no one was looking. But here I was, drawn to it like a moth to flame, a restless curiosity gnawing at me. Just a quick look, I muttered to myself, though the tremor in my voice betrayed my bravado. It's just a forest. The ground crunched beneath my feet as I stepped forward, a sound oddly loud in the oppressive silence. The trees closed in around me, their bark rough and unwelcoming. Every rustle set my heart racing. With each step, the light from the setting sun faded, swallowed by the thick canopy above. Shadows danced in my peripheral vision, and I swore I could hear whispers carried by the wind. I shook my head, trying to clear the dark thoughts swirling in my mind. A snap of a twig made me jump, and I spun around, adrenaline spiking. Is someone there? My voice quivered, the words barely escaping my lips. Silence answered, but the feeling of being watched clung to me like a damp fog. I pressed deeper into the woods, drawn by an inexplicable pull. The deeper I went, the more the atmosphere thickened, the air heavy with the scent of damp earth and decay. The trees seemed to lean closer, their branches brushing against me like skeletal hands as I moved past. Stop being such a coward, I chastised myself, forcing a laugh that felt brittle in my throat. It's just a forest. Just trees. But the laughter echoed back to me in a mocking tone, and I shivered. I stumbled upon a clearing. The moonlight spilled into the space like a silver waterfall, illuminating what appeared to be an old, crumbling cabin. It stood there, nestled between the trees, shrouded in vines and shadows, a dark secret waiting to be uncovered. My heart raced as I approached. The door hung ajar, creaking gently in the wind, as if inviting me in. Just a peek, I whispered, pushing the door open. It groaned in protest, revealing a dim interior cloaked in dust and cobwebs. The air inside was stale, thick with the scent of mold and something far more unsettling. As I stepped inside, the floorboards creaked under my weight, each sound echoing through the silence. "Hello?" I called, my voice sounding small and fragile. "Hello," I called, my voice sounding small and fragile. "Is anyone here?" There was no response, just the distant hoot of an owl outside. I moved deeper into the cabin, my curiosity battling against the primal urge to flee. Old furniture lay scattered about, draped in sheets like ghosts waiting for a master who would never return. The fireplace stood silent, its ashes long cold, and in the corner, a strange wooden doll rested on a dust-covered table, its painted eyes gleaming in the dim light. I reached out to touch it, the surface smooth beneath my fingers. "Creepy little thing," I muttered. Just as I turned to leave, a loud bang echoed from the back of the cabin, making me jump. What the hell was that? I hesitated, weighing my options. The rational part of my brain screamed to run, but the thrill of fear coursed through my veins, urging me to investigate. I stepped cautiously toward the sound, each footfall echoing like a heartbeat in the silence. It's probably just the wind, I told myself, though it did little to calm the rising panic. The back room was dark, the air thick with a sense of foreboding. I fumbled for my phone. Turning on the flashlight feature, the beam cut through the darkness, revealing a simple storage area lined with old crates and broken furniture. But in the far corner, something glimmered. A small mirror, cracked and dusty. I approached it, wiping the grime away with my sleeve. My reflection stared back at me, pale and wide-eyed. But something moved behind me, a fleeting shadow that sent my heart racing. "Who's there?" I shouted, spinning around, the light flickering over the empty space. Nothing, just the whisper of the wind and the rustle of leaves outside. My breath came faster now, my instincts screaming at me to leave. But something held me in place. I turned back to the mirror, and as I did, I noticed a figure standing just behind my reflection. A woman in a tattered dress, her face obscured by shadows. But when I looked again, she was gone. Just my terrified reflection staring back. "Get a grip, get a grip," I chanted, forcing myself to breathe. Then I heard it, a low, mournful moan, echoing through the cabin. My courage faltered. "But is someone there?" I called, my voice shaking. "Please, just show yourself." Silence. Then the moaning intensified, a haunting wail that seemed to seep from the very walls. I turned to run, but the door slammed shut with a deafening bang. "No, no! Let me out!" I pounded on the door, panic clawing at my throat. The moaning turned to laughter, a chilling sound that echoed in the darkness. "You shouldn't have come here," the voice taunted, dripping with malice. "You're trapped now." I spun around, heart racing, searching for the source. The room felt alive. The shadows shifted, swirling around me. "What do you want?" I shouted, my voice cracking. "I didn't mean any harm. Your curiosity has brought you here, and now you will pay the price," the voice hissed. The laughter grew louder, filling the space, wrapping around me like a thick fog. I stumbled back, feeling the cold seep into my bones. I had to escape. I turned back to the door, slamming my shoulder against it. "Let me out. I didn't do anything." But it wouldn't budge, the sound of my panic echoing back at me. Then I saw her again, the woman from the mirror, standing in the shadows. Her eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and her mouth twisted into a sinister smile. "You're not the first, and you won't be the last," she whispered, her voice a chilling caress. I backed away, heart pounding in my chest. "Get away from me," I screamed, the sound reverberating in the small space. But she stepped closer, her form shifting, becoming more defined. "You have something I want," she said, tilting her head as if sizing me up. "Your fear. It feeds me." "No," I shouted, scrambling for the fireplace, searching for anything to defend myself. My fingers brushed against a rusted poker, and I gripped it tightly. "Stay back," she laughed, a sound that chilled me to the core. "You think you can fight me? You are already mine." I lunged forward, swinging the poker, but it passed through her like mist. She simply laughed again, the sound echoing in my ears. "You can't escape your fate, little one." Desperation overtook me. I turned and ran for the back window, pushing against it with all my strength. It rattled, but wouldn't budge. "Help! Someone help!" I cried, my voice breaking. "Help won't come," the voice sang, and the laughter filled the room, drowning out my pleas. I felt the air grow cold, the shadows closing in around me. You are alone now. I dropped to my knees, gasping, tears streaming down my face. Gasping, tears streaming down my face. Please, I just wanted to see. I didn't mean to intrude. I begged. Curiosity killed the cat. She whispered, her breath cold against my skin. And it will kill you too. The laughter reached a fever pitch, an unsettling symphony that seemed to vibrate through the very walls. I pressed my hands to my ears, but it was no use. The sound was all-consuming. Then, in that moment of despair, I remembered the mirror. The shard of glass might be my only chance. I scrambled to my feet and dashed back to the storage room, ignoring the chaos swirling around me. I could feel her presence behind me, a shadow lurking in my periphery. I grabbed the mirror shard, its edge glinting ominously in the dim light. "You won't have me," I shouted, turning to face her. "I refuse to be your meal." The laughter faltered and the room grew silent. I took a step closer, brandishing the shard. "Get away from me," I yelled. For a moment, I thought I had the upper hand. But then her face twisted in rage, her eyes narrowing. "You think you can defy me?" And just like that, the shadows surged forward, wrapping around me, pulling me back. I slashed at them with the glass shard, but it felt like cutting through smoke. "No! No!" I screamed, fighting against the invisible grip. "Your fear is delicious," she hissed, her voice echoing in my mind. "And now you will join the others." The world around me blurred, and I felt myself being pulled deeper into the shadows. "Help!" I cried, but my voice was swallowed by the darkness. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the grip released. I stumbled back, gasping for breath. The cabin around me fading slowly. The laughter lingered, echoing in my mind, as I felt myself being drawn away, pulled back into the world of the living. I woke up on the forest floor, the moon shining down through the trees. My heart raced, the remnants of fear still clinging to me. I scrambled to my feet, glancing back at the cabin. But it was gone, vanished, as if it had never existed. "What the hell just happened?" I whispered, my breath shaky. I couldn't explain it, couldn't make sense of the nightmare, but one thing was certain. Thornwood Forest would never release me. I was a part of its twisted tale now, a story that would haunt me for the rest of my life. Story 6, the raging storm outside, rattling the old wooden shutters of my grandmother's house. The creaking timbers echoed through the empty spaces, their groans harmonizing with the eerie sounds of the night. I had always loved visiting her, but this time felt different. Heavier, as if the air itself was thick with secrets waiting to be uncovered. I wrapped my arms around myself, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the drafty windows. Grandma had been gone for nearly a year, but her presence lingered in the faded wallpaper and the dusty furniture. I could almost hear her voice, soft and soothing, urging me to find comfort in the familiar. Yet, tonight, that comfort felt like a cruel joke. With a deep breath, I ventured into the living room, the floorboards creaking beneath my weight. Shadows danced along the walls, cast by the flickering light of the fireplace. I approached the mantel, running my fingers over the dusty trinkets. An old clock, a porcelain cat, a framed photograph of Grandma in her youth, smiling brightly. But it was the mirror beside it that caught my attention. Its surface was dark and mottled, reflecting not just my image, but something else. A fleeting shadow that vanished when I blinked. "Just the wind," I whispered to myself, though my voice trembled with uncertainty. I turned away, but the feeling of being watched prickled at my skin. I settled onto the faded floral couch, trying to shake off the unease. The storm outside raged on, thunder rumbling like a warning. I pulled out my phone, checking the time. Midnight. I had promised myself I wouldn't stay long, but the storm had caught me off guard. I needed to wait it out. The power flickered, and the room was briefly engulfed in darkness. I held my breath, the silence pressing down on me until the lights returned, casting a warm glow over the room. That's when I heard it, a soft, raspy whisper, like someone calling my name. Eva. My heart raced, pounding in my chest like a trapped bird. Hello, I called, my voice shaky. No response, just the echo of the wind outside. I stood, every muscle tense, the hairs on my arms standing on end. I crept toward the hallway, heart thudding louder with each step. The shadows loomed, stretching and twisting in the corners of my vision. I tried to convince myself it was just the flickering light, but a sense of dread settled deep in my gut. I'm being ridiculous, I muttered, but the words felt hollow. As I approached the first bedroom, the door creaked open slightly, as if inviting me in. I hesitated, glancing back at the living room. Maybe just a quick look, I said, though the words felt like a lie. I stepped inside, the air stale and thick with dust. The moonlight barely illuminated the room, casting ghostly shapes on the walls. The bed was unmade, sheets tangled and forgotten. A doll sat on the nightstand, its glassy eyes reflecting the pale light. I shivered, a wave of sadness washing over me. I could almost hear Grandma's laughter, her warm voice filling the space. But the laughter twisted into something else, a low chuckle that sent chills racing down my spine. Eva. The whisper was clearer now, more insistent. I jerked around, the sound coming from the closet. My breath hitched as I approached, the floor creaking under my weight. Is someone there? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The darkness loomed, and I reached for the door, my hand trembling. With a swift motion, I pulled it open, and a rush of cold air enveloped me. Nothing was inside, just empty coats swaying like skeletal arms. I let out a shaky breath, half laughing at my own fear. Just my imagination, I said, forcing a smile. But as I turned to leave, a cold hand clamped around my wrist, tightening like a vice. Don't go, I screamed, the sound tearing from my throat like a wounded animal. Let go of me? I yanked my arm, but the grip only tightened. Panic surged through me, and I stumbled backward, falling into the bed. Eva. The voice was softer now, almost pleading. I squinted into the dark, my heart racing. Please, don't be afraid. Who are you? I gasped, scrambling back until my back hit the wall. What do you want? I just want to talk. The voice was familiar, sending a shiver down my spine. I'm here because of you. The moonlight caught a figure emerging from the shadows, a translucent form that flickered like a flame. It was a woman, her features soft yet sorrowful. My breath caught in my throat. Grandma, Eva? Her voice was like a distant echo, filled with longing. I've been waiting for you. Waiting for me? Why? I stammered, my mind racing with questions. You're gone. I'm not gone, she insisted, taking a step closer. I'm here, but I can't stay long. There's something you need to know. What? What is it? I felt a strange pull toward her, a mix of fear and familiarity. The house, it holds the key. Her gaze drifted to the wall, where an old portrait hung, its colors faded. You need to find it, before it's too late. Find what? I pressed, confusion swirling in my mind. Listen to me, Eva. The darkness is coming. You can't let it take you. Her voice was urgent, filled with a desperation that gripped my heart. What darkness? I felt a knot form in my stomach. What do I have to do? But just as quickly as she appeared, she began to fade, her figure blurring like a mirage. But you have to believe. I'll always be with you. Wait, don't go. I reached out, but she vanished, leaving me in a suffocating, sudden silence. The air felt thick, and I could hear the distant rumble of thunder growing closer. I stumbled to my feet, my mind racing. What did she mean by the darkness? I had to find out. I rushed back to the living room, the shadows feeling alive, creeping along the walls. The mirror caught my eye again, its surface swirling ominously. I approached, my heart pounding as I stared into it. "Show me," I whispered, desperation creeping into my voice. The glass rippled, and I leaned closer, feeling an inexplicable connection. Images began to form, flashes of my childhood, of Grandma smiling, of laughter echoing through the halls. But then they twisted, dark shapes creeping in, distorting the memories. "Eva!" The whisper returned, low and menacing. I recoiled, stumbling backward. "She really destroyed," I shouted into the void. "What are you?" "Join us," the voice hissed, the shadows thickening around me. Panic surged as the room seemed to close in, darkness wrapping around me like a suffocating blanket. I had to escape, to find the light, to break free from whatever this was. I dashed back to the hallway. The air growing colder, the wind howled outside, the storm raging with a ferocity that matched my fear. I needed to find the key Grandma spoke of. I needed answers. I rushed to the kitchen, my mind racing. Maybe there was something there. Something she left behind. The cabinets loomed like sentinels, their opaque surfaces reflecting my frantic movements. I flung them open one by one, searching for anything that might help. "Come on! Come on!" I muttered, desperation clawing at my chest. Just as I was about to give in to despair, I noticed a small box tucked away in a corner, hidden beneath layers of dust. I grasped it, my hand shaking as I pulled it into the light. Inside were letters, beautifully written, filled with love and warmth. I recognized Grandma's handwriting immediately. As I read through them, tears began to prickle at the corners of my eyes. Each letter was a piece of her heart, a testament to her love for me and the life she had lived. But one letter stood out, its pages worn and crumpled. "Dear Eva," it began, "if you ever find this, know that the darkness is real. It will come for you, as it came for me. You must find the light within you, the strength to face it. Do not let it take you. I believe in you." The weight of her words settled over me, filling me with a sense of purpose. "I won't let you down," I whispered, determination flooding my veins. Suddenly, the lights flickered again, the shadows deepening around me. I could feel the pressure building, the darkness creeping closer, hungry for my fear. "You can't have me," I shouted, my voice steady this time. I rushed back to the living room, the box clutched tightly in my hands. I approached the mirror once more, its surface swirling with darkness. "You're not real," I screamed, the words echoing in the silence. "You're just a shadow." With every ounce of strength I had, I raised the box before me, its contents spilling out. "I choose love," I declared, the letters fluttering around me like wings. The shadows recoiled, hissing and twisting as if repelled by my words. The mirror cracked, light bursting forth in a brilliant flash. The shadows shrieked, retreating into the corners of the room. Drawn back by the light, I felt warmth envelop me, a sense of safety washing over my skin. "Eva!" Grandma's voice echoed in the distance, filled with pride. You've done it. As the darkness dissolved, I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. I stood alone in the living room, the storm outside beginning to wane. The air felt lighter, the oppressive weight lifting. I glanced at the mirror, its surface now clear, reflecting not just my image, but a sense of hope. I had faced the darkness and emerged stronger. "Thank you, Grandma," I whispered, a smile breaking through my tears. "I won't forget," and with that, I turned toward the window, ready to embrace the dawn that awaited me, knowing that love would always be the light in the shadows. Story 7. The old Victorian house stood on a knoll overlooking the town, its silhouette a jagged tooth against the bruised twilight sky. Locals whispered about the Blackwood house, their voices hushed, their eyes darting towards its darkened windows. They spoke of shadows that moved on their own, of chilling whispers carried on the wind, of the family who vanished without a trace half a century ago. I, of course, hadn't believed the tales. As a writer of horror, I sought out such places, drawn to the dark allure of their histories. The Blackwood house was my latest fascination, a potential goldmine of inspiration for my next novel. I'd secured permission from the distant relatives who now owned the property, a cold, legalistic transaction with little room for sentiment, and arrived on a blustery autumn evening, the air thick with the scent of decaying leaves and the promise of a good scare. The house was everything the rumors suggested, and more. Dust lay thick as a shroud over ornate furniture, draped with cobwebs. The air hung heavy and stagnant, a palpable presence that prickled my skin. Moonlight filtered through grimy windows, casting long dancing shadows that writhed like restless spirits. Each creak of the floorboards, each sigh of the wind through broken panes, felt heavy with unspoken stories. I spent the first few hours meticulously documenting the house. My camera flash illuminated faded portraits of stern-faced individuals, their eyes seeming to follow me as I moved. I noted the intricate carvings on the banister, the water-stained wallpaper depicting scenes of pastoral bliss now warped and unsettling. There was a palpable sense of sorrow clinging to the place, a melancholic residue of lives lived and lost. The first genuinely unnerving event occurred late that night. I was in the library, a vast room lined with towering bookshelves, their contents decaying into brittle fragments. The silence was profound, broken only by the rhythmic ticking of an unseen clock. Then a soft whisper, like a breath against my ear. I spun around, heart hammering, but the room was empty. Dismissing it as my imagination, I returned to my notes. The whisper came again, closer this time, a sibilant sound that seemed to articulate a single chilling word: leave. My skepticism began to fray. The house had a way of amplifying the silence, making any unexpected sound feel significant. I told myself it was the wind playing tricks, the old house settling, but deep down, a primal fear began to stir. Over the next few days, the unsettling occurrences escalated. Footsteps echoed in the empty hallways above me. Doors I'd sworn were locked would swing open with a groan. Objects would shift. A book moved from the shelf to the floor, a child's wooden toy appearing on the grand piano. I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, the feeling of being watched a constant, icy presence on the back of my neck. One afternoon, while exploring the attic, I stumbled upon a child's nursery. Dust motes danced in the sunbeams filtering through a grimy window, illuminating a rocking horse with chipped paint and a collection of porcelain dolls with vacant, staring eyes. A sense of profound sadness washed over me. This was where the Blackwood children had played, their laughter now just a ghost in the silence. As I reached out to touch the rocking horse, a low, rhythmic humming filled the air. It seemed to emanate from the walls themselves, a vibration that resonated deep within my bones. The humming grew louder, more insistent, until it became a low, guttural moan, Fear, sharp and cold, pierced through my intellectual curiosity. I backed away slowly, my eyes darting nervously around the room. But there was nothing there, just the silent toys and the oppressive hum. Sleep became a luxury I could barely afford. Every creak, every rustle, every shift in the shadows kept me on edge. Nighttime was the worst, the darkness amplifying the unsettling sounds and the feeling of being watched. I started seeing things in the periphery of my vision, fleeting shadows, the glint of eyes in the darkness. I began to doubt my sanity, wondering if the isolation and the house's oppressive atmosphere were finally getting to me. Then came the dreams, then vivid, terrifying nightmares filled with whispering voices and shadowy figures. I wake up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding, the lingering sense of dread clinging to me like a shroud. The dreams bled into my waking hours, blurring the line between reality and nightmare. One particularly disturbing dream involved a little girl, her face pale and gaunt, her eyes wide with terror. She reached out to me, her small hand translucent, whispering, "It's still here. It never left." The next day, driven by a desperate need for answers, I decided to delve into the house history. I found old newspapers and family journals tucked away in a dusty trunk in the basement. They told the story of the Blackwood family, a wealthy, respected clan whose idyllic life was shattered by tragedy. Their youngest daughter, Lily, had died mysteriously in her sleep. Shortly after, the rest of the family vanished, leaving behind all their possessions, their lives abruptly cut short. The newspapers offered theories: a tragic accident, a desperate escape, even foul play. But no bodies were ever found. As I read, a chilling realization dawned on me. The whispers, the shadows, the child's toys. It wasn't just the history of the house haunting me. It was something more, something present. That night, the activity intensified. The footsteps overhead were no longer random. They were deliberate, heavy, pacing back and forth. The whispers grew louder, more distinct, forming words, sentences. They seemed to be calling my name. Driven by a mixture of terror and morbid curiosity, I followed the sounds. They led me to a hidden door in the library, concealed behind a bookshelf. With trembling hands, I pushed it open. A narrow, winding staircase descended into darkness. The air that wafted up was cold and stale, carrying a faint, cloying sweetness that made my stomach churn. Hesitantly, I descended, my flashlight beam cutting through the oppressive blackness. The staircase led to a small, windowless cellar, and in the center of the room, illuminated by the beam of my flashlight, was something that made my blood run cold. It was a makeshift altar, constructed from old crates and draped with a tattered piece of fabric. On it lay a collection of objects. Lily Blackwood's favorite doll, its porcelain face cracked and marred, a lock of faded blonde hair, and a small leather-bound book. I cautiously picked up the book. Its pages were filled with childish handwriting, interspersed with disturbing drawings of shadowy figures and grotesque creatures. As I flipped through the pages, I understood. Lily hadn't just died. Something else had happened. The drawings hinted at a presence, a dark entity that had taken root in the house, preying on the vulnerable child. The whispers, the shadows. They weren't remnants of the past. They were manifestations of something malevolent, something that still lingered. Suddenly, the cellar door slammed shut with a deafening bang. My flashlight beam flickered, then died, plunging me into absolute darkness. The whispers intensified, swirling around me. No longer distant sounds, but voices right beside my ears, cold and mocking. I fumbled for my phone, my hands shaking uncontrollably. The screen illuminated my panicked face, but there was no signal. I was trapped. A cold breath brushed against my neck, A touch, like icy fingers, trailed down my arm. The cloying sweetness in the air intensified, becoming sickeningly overpowering. I backed away, stumbling over loose stones on the floor. I could hear movement in the darkness, the soft padding of unseen feet. I could feel its presence closing in, an invisible weight pressing down on me. Panic choked me. I screamed, a raw, desperate sound that was swallowed by the darkness. I dashed blindly, trying to find the door, but the cellar seemed to shift and twist around me, the walls closing in. The whispers coalesced into a single, chilling voice, right behind me. "You shouldn't have come here." A cold, skeletal hand grasped my shoulder. I felt a sharp, agonizing pain, like being pierced by 1,000 needles. My vision blurred, my body went numb. The darkness enveloped me, no longer just the absence of light, but a tangible presence, pulling me down, into its cold embrace. The next morning, the sun rose, casting its golden light on the Blackwood house, its silhouette no longer a jagged tooth, but a silent, brooding sentinel. The house remained still, its secrets locked within its decaying walls. The townsfolk would whisper, as they always had, about the Blackwood house, about the family who vanished, and now they would whisper about the writer who went in and never came out, another victim claimed by the darkness that dwelled within. The horror of the Blackwood house wasn't just a story. It was a living, breathing entity, waiting for its next unsuspecting visitor. Story 8. The old cabin sagged like a tired beast against the relentless assault of the wind. Rain lashed against the warped wooden siding, mimicking the frantic rhythm of Elias's heart. He huddled deeper into the threadbare armchair, the only source of light a flickering oil lamp on the mantelpiece. Outside, the storm raged, and inside, a different kind of storm brewed, a creeping terror that had taken root in the silence between the thunderclaps. Elias had sought refuge here, in the forgotten corner of his grandfather's estate, hoping the solitude would soothe his fractured nerves. He'd seen things he couldn't explain during his research deep in the Amazon. Glimpses of rituals, of shadows moving just beyond the periphery, of a primal fear that resonated deep within the human soul. He dismissed it as jungle fever, a trick of the oppressive heat and the constant buzz of insects. But the fear had followed him home, a persistent whisper in the quiet hours. The cabin, initially a haven, had begun to feel wrong. Subtle shifts at first. The way the shadows seemed to deepen and rise when he wasn't looking directly at them. The faint earthy smell that clung to the air, like freshly turned soil. And the sounds. Oh, the sounds. Oh, the delicate, insistent scratching, like tiny claws on wood, usually emanating from the attic above his head. He'd initially dismissed it as rodents, but the scraping was too rhythmic, too deliberate. He'd set traps, found nothing. The scratching persisted. Then came the whispers, faint, sibilant murmurings that seemed to cling to the edges of his hearing. He'd strained to hear them, convinced it was the wind whistling through the cracks in the walls. But the air outside was still, heavy with the impending storm. The whispers were just beyond comprehension, fragmented syllables that sent a shiver crawling down his spine. Tonight, however, was different. The scratching was louder, more frantic, as if something was desperately trying to break through the ceiling. The whispers had coalesced into a single wordless hum, a low, thrumming vibration that resonated in his bones. And there was something new, a heavy, dragging sound from the back of the cabin, a slow, deliberate slide across the floorboards. Terror, raw and primal, clawed at his throat. He gripped the worn arms of the chair, his knuckles white. He wanted to run, to burst out into the storm and lose himself in the chaos. But a cold dread held him captive. He felt watched, studied by unseen eyes. He forced himself to breathe, slow and deep, trying to rationalize what he was hearing. Old houses settled. The wind played tricks. His mind, still reeling from his experiences, was conjuring phantoms. Suddenly, the scratching stopped. The humming faded. The dragging sound ceased. An unnerving silence descended upon the cabin, broken only by the relentless drumming of the rain. It was a silence pregnant with anticipation. A silence that felt far more menacing than the cacophony that preceded it. Then, a new sound, a soft thud, like something heavy falling to the floor in the back room. It was followed by a wet, sucking sound. Elias's stomach churned. He pictured something fleshy, something organic, being pulled across the wooden planks. He had to see, he had to know. The uncertainty was a torment he could no longer bear. With trembling hands, he picked up the oil lamp, its flame casting grotesque, dancing shadows on the walls. He moved slowly, each creak of the floorboards under his weight amplified in the oppressive stillness. He reached the doorway to the back room. The door was slightly ajar. He pushed it open with a hesitant hand. The air in the room was thick with a cloying sweetness, like rotting fruit mixed with something metallic. The oil lamp's feeble light barely penetrated the gloom. He held it higher, his heart hammering against his ribs. At first he saw nothing out of the ordinary. A dusty old trunk in the corner, a pile of moth-eaten blankets, a cobweb-draped rocking chair. Then his gaze fell to the floor. A dark, viscous stain spread across the wooden planks, its edges shimmering in the lamplight. It wasn't blood, he realized with a sickening lurch. It was too thick, too oily. And it wasn't just a stain. It was moving, slowly, deliberately. The dark substance was creeping across the floor, tendrils extending like grasping fingers. His breath hitched in his throat. He took a step back, his foot landing on something slick. He looked down. More of the dark substance coated the floor around him, sticking to his boots like tar. And then he saw it. In the far corner of the room, partially obscured by the shadows, was a shape, a tall, gaunt-figured figure, draped in what looked like dried mud and decaying leaves. It was motionless, its back to him. He could hear his own ragged breathing, the frantic thumping of his heart. He wanted to scream, but his vocal cords seemed paralyzed. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, the figure began to turn. Its head was elongated, almost skull-like, with empty sockets where eyes should have been. But there was something there in the darkness of those sockets, a faint, malevolent glimmer. Its mouth was a wide, lipless gash, filled with rows of needle-sharp teeth, and from the corners of its mouth, the same dark, oily substance dripped onto its chest. The figure's movements were jerky, unnatural, like a marionette with tangled strings. As it turned fully to face him, Elias could see its hands, long, skeletal fingers tipped with wickedly sharp claws. A whisper, thin and reedy, slithered through the air, not from the creature's mouth, but from somewhere deep inside it. It wasn't a word, but a sound, a vibration that resonated with the primal fear he'd felt in the jungle, amplified 1,000-fold. It was the sound of something ancient, something hungry. Terror finally broke its hold on his vocal cords. A strangled cry escaped his lips as he stumbled backward, the oil lamp slipping from his grasp and shattering on the floor. Darkness enveloped the room, punctuated only by the flickering embers of the spilled oil. He could hear the creature moving, a slow, dragging shuffle across the floor. Closer, closer. He could smell it now, the cloying sweetness mixed with the scent of damp earth and decay. He scrambled back, his hands flailing, searching for purchase, for escape. He bumped into the wall, trapped. He could feel its presence now, right in front of him. A cold, oppressive weight in the darkness. He could hear its breathing, a wet, rasping sound. A clawed hand reached out, its touch like ice on his cheek. He flinched, squeezing his eyes shut, bracing for the pain, but the pain didn't come. Instead, he felt a strange curiosity. The whisper filled his mind, no longer just a sound, but a presence, probing, examining. It was looking into him, into his fears, into his darkest thoughts. He opened his eyes. The creature was still there, its empty sockets fixed on him, but its posture had changed. It wasn't menacing anymore. It was studying him. The whisper intensified, and suddenly he understood. The creature wasn't here to harm him. It was feeding on him, on his fear, on the negativity that had clung to him since his return from the Amazon. The scratching, the whispers, the dragging. It was the process, the slow consumption of his anxieties. He felt a strange sense of relief wash over him. The fear was still there, but it was accepted. He was a vessel, a source of sustenance. The creature's head tilted, and the oily substance dripped onto his hand. It felt cold, strangely, alive. He didn't resist. He couldn't. He closed his eyes, a single tear tracing a path through the grime on his cheek. The whispers filled his mind, soothing, consuming. The fear began to ebb, replaced by a strange sense of emptiness. The storm outside continued to rage, oblivious to the silent transaction taking place within the old cabin. The wind howled, the rain lashed against the walls, but inside there was only a quiet hum, a gentle sucking sound, and the gradual fading of a man into the shadows. The cabin, once a refuge, had become a larder, and Elias, in his desperate search for solace, had become its willing prey. Story 9. I had never believed the stories about the old Waverly House, but with every creak of its ancient floorboards beneath my feet, that skepticism waned. Dark clouds loomed overhead, casting shadows that danced like phantoms across the dilapidated walls. I shivered, pulling my jacket tighter around me, a chill seeping into my bones. "Are you sure we should be here?" Sarah's voice was barely a murmur, her eyes darting nervously around the room. She stood just inside the threshold, clutching her phone like a lifeline, its dim glow illuminating her anxious expression. "It's just an old house," I replied, trying to sound braver than I felt. "We're here for the thrill, remember? Ghost stories don't hurt anyone." "Yeah, but what if they aren't just stories?" she whispered, her voice trembling. I glanced at her. The way her fingers fidgeted with the edge of her shirt, betraying her bravado. I stepped further into the dimly lit hallway, the air thick with dust and the smell of decay. "Come on, we'll just take a quick look around. It'll be fun." I forced a laugh, but it sounded hollow even to my ears. As we ventured deeper, the floorboards groaned underfoot, each step sounding like a warning. The walls were lined with faded portraits, their eyes seeming to follow us, judging our intrusion. I could almost hear their whispers. Stories of betrayal, madness, and despair. "This place gives me the creeps," Sarah said, her voice tense. Suddenly a loud crash echoed from upstairs, making us both jump. What was that? Sarah's face paled, and I felt my heartbeat quicken. I don't know. Maybe it's just the wind, I said, but even I didn't believe it. "Let's get out of here," she urged, turning toward the door. "Wait." I grabbed her arm, the urgency of the moment igniting a spark of defiance in me. We came here to prove there's nothing to fear. Let's just check it out. Together, with a reluctant nod, we climbed the staircase, each step a muted thud. The air grew heavier, thick with anticipation. The second floor was a long hallway lined with doors, some slightly ajar, others sealed tight, as if hiding their secrets. Let's try this one, I suggested, pushing open a door at random. It led to a dusty bedroom, the bed draped in a moth-eaten quilt, a layer of dust covering everything like a shroud. As I stepped inside, the floor creaked ominously. See? Nothing here but old junk. I forced a smile, but my nerves buzzed like a swarm of hornets. Yeah, junk. That feels like it could come to life at any moment, Sarah muttered, peering into a cracked mirror that hung crookedly on the wall. Just relax, I said, stepping closer to her. I wanted to comfort her, to reassure myself as much as her. Let's take a selfie for proof we were here. Really? She raised an eyebrow, skepticism written all over her face. Come on! It'll be fun. I held up my phone, my smile wide as I angled us in front of the mirror. Say, ghosts, ghosts, she laughed, albeit nervously, and we both felt a rush of adrenaline. As I lowered the phone, the image in the mirror flickered, just for a heartbeat. A shadow darted behind us, and my heart dropped into my stomach. Did you see that? See what? Sarah asked, her laughter dying. Funny. Oh no. She turned to leave, but I was rooted in place, staring at the mirror. The reflection showed us, but there was something else, a faint outline of a figure standing in the doorway behind us. It was translucent, its face obscured. Evelyn, Sarah, look, I gasped, my voice barely above a whisper. She turned just in time to see the shadow vanish, and her face paled further. Nope. 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 I'm out. Wait. Could have just been a trick of the light. Trick of the light, she shrieked, her voice echoing through the hall. Get me out of here. Before I could respond, she bolted for the door, her footsteps thunderous against the floor. I hesitated, torn between the urge to run and the curiosity that gripped me. Sarah, come back, I called, but my voice was swallowed by the silence that enveloped the house. I followed her into the hallway, my heart racing. Sarah, her frantic footsteps echoed ahead, fading into the distance. I cursed under my breath, the fear gnawing at my insides. Where are you? I shouted, panic creeping in. The house felt alive, its walls closing in around me. I ran down the hall, the air thickening with each step. I reached for the door at the end, throwing it open. It led to a darkened attic. Sarah, I yelled again, but only silence answered. Sarah, I yelled again, but only silence answered. I took a hesitant step inside, feeling the dust motes swirl in the dim light filtering through a small window. The air was stifling. I could hear my own breathing, ragged and uneven as I scanned the room. Then I heard it. A faint hum, almost melodic, drifting through the air. It sent chills down my spine. Sarah, is that you? I called out, but the hum continued, a siren's call. I couldn't help but be drawn toward it as I moved deeper into the attic. The sound grew louder, more insistent. It beckoned me, wrapping around my senses like a shroud. I stepped closer to a large, dusty trunk sitting in the corner. The hum seemed to emanate from it, vibrating through the floorboards. I knelt beside it, hesitating for a moment. What are you? I whispered, reaching out to touch the faded wood. Suddenly, the trunk slammed open, and I stumbled back, heart racing. The humming stopped, replaced by a chilling silence. I gasped, scrambling away. Evelyn, A voice whispered, low and haunting, echoing around me. "Who are you?" I breathed, panic flooding my veins. The figure appeared again, a spectral form rising from the trunk. It was a woman, her face twisted in anguish, eyes dark as night. "You shouldn't have come here." I stumbled backward, my breath caught in my throat. "No, stay away. Help me," she implored, her voice a mournful wail that reverberated through the attic. "What do you want?" I shouted, backing into the wall, the cold wood pressing against me. "Free me," she murmured, reaching toward me with skeletal fingers. "Get away from me," I screamed, suddenly turning to flee, racing back down the stairs. My heart pounded in my chest as I tore through the hallway, desperate to find Sarah. "Sarah!" I cried, the name echoing against the walls. But as I reached the second floor, the air shifted, the house trembled, and the shadows twisted ominously. The doors slammed shut, one after another, sealing me in. "No, no, no!" I pounded on the nearest door, panic flooding my thoughts. "Let me out!" "Evelyn!" the voice echoed again, surrounding me, suffocating me. I whirled around, eyes wide as the figure manifested again. "Closer this time! You must help me! Help you? Help you?" "Why would I help you?" I shouted, fear coursing through me. "Because I cannot be free until you understand," she whispered, her voice layered with sorrow. "Understand what?" I demanded, my voice trembling. "Waverly House holds the truth of my fate," she said, her form flickering. "You must face the darkness to save the light." "What darkness?" I pressed, desperate for answers, for a way out. "Your friend. She is in danger." "Sarah!" I felt a cold wave of dread wash over me. "What have you done to her?" "Not me." "The house." The figure shook her head, anguish etched on her ethereal face. I felt the walls closing in, the air thickening with an oppressive weight. Show me," I yelled, my voice breaking. "Show me what I need to do." The ghostly figure raised her hand, and the shadows swirled around me, pulling me toward a door at the end of the hallway. I hesitated, but the urgency in her eyes compelled me. "Go," she urged, her voice echoing like a distant thunderclap. I dashed toward the door, flinging it open to reveal a room filled with swirling darkness. "Sarah!" I shouted, stepping inside, the air electric with tension. The room felt alive, a pulse thrumming beneath my feet. I could see Sarah in the corner, her back against the wall, eyes wide with terror. "Evelyn," she gasped, her voice strained. "Hold on." I rushed to her, grabbing her arm. "We need to get out of here." But as I turned, the door slammed shut behind us, sealing our fate. "No!" I screamed, pounding on the door. "Let us out." The air thickened again, shadows swirling like a storm around us. The voice of the house echoed, a cacophony of whispers that drowned out reason. "Help us!" Sarah cried, panic rising in her voice. "Listen to me!" I shouted, fighting against the encroaching darkness. "We need to face it. We have to confront whatever this is. Evelyn, I can't." Sarah trembled, her eyes glistening with fear. "I just want to go home." "We have to fight." The shadows writhed, and I felt a surge of anger. "You don't control us," I shouted, my voice rising above the chaos. "We're not afraid of you." The room trembled, and the figure reappeared, her anguished face now a mask of fury. "You cannot escape." "Then let us help you," I yelled, my heart racing. "Tell us what you need." The shadows paused, a moment of stillness hanging in the air. "You must face the truth," the figure whispered, her voice softer now. "Then show us," I demanded. The shadows swirled, and suddenly, images flooded my mind. Memories of betrayal, despair. I saw the house as it once was, vibrant and alive, then crumbling under the weight of secrets. "Help me break the cycle," the figure urged, her voice echoing with desperation. "We need to let go," I realized, the truth dawning. "We can't be bound by fear." "Yes." Sarah nodded, her resolve strengthening. "We can do this. Together." We faced the darkness, our voices rising in defiance. "We are not afraid." The shadows recoiled, and the figure looked at us, a flicker of hope in her eyes. A flicker of hope in her eyes. "Free me." With a final surge of determination, I reached out, grasping Sarah's hand. Together. As our voices united, the shadows erupted, swirling around us in a furious storm. Light pierced through the darkness, illuminating the room. "Let's go," we shouted, and the walls trembled as the figure began to dissolve, her anguish fading into tranquility. "Thank you," she whispered, and with that, she vanished, leaving us in a peaceful silence. The door swung open, revealing the dim hallway beyond. "Is it over?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. "I think so," I breathed, the weight lifting from my chest. We stepped cautiously into the hallway, the air around us feeling lighter. "Let's get out of here," I said, taking her hand. As we descended the stairs, the house felt different, less oppressive, almost welcoming. The shadows receded, and the haunting whispers faded into distant memories. We pushed through the front door, stepping out into the night, the moonlight illuminating the path before us. "Maybe there's hope for this place after all," I murmured, glancing back at the old Waverly house. "Yeah," Sarah said, a small smile breaking through her fear. "As long as we don't come back." Story 10. The old logging road had become a tunnel of gnarled branches, the skeletal arms of the forest reaching out to snag his clothes. Rain, a fine, insidious drizzle, seeped through the canopy, chilling him to the bone despite his layers. Daniel cursed under his breath, checking the GPS on his phone for the 10th time in as many minutes. He was supposed to be meeting his friend, Mark, at the abandoned Blackwood Mill, a location infamous for its string of unexplained disappearances decades ago. Mark, ever the thrill-seeker, had insisted on exploring it, convinced he'd find the key to the mysteries. Daniel, ever the cautious one, had reluctantly agreed, his curiosity battling a primal urge to stay far, far away. He dismissed the local legends as folklore, stories whispered to frighten children, until he'd actually started driving into the dense, oppressive woods surrounding Blackwood. The air itself felt heavier here, the silence punctuated only by the dripping of water and the rustling of unseen things in the undergrowth. The GPS finally flickered to life, pinpointing the mill just ahead. Daniel emerged from the claustrophobic embrace of the trees into a clearing dominated by a towering, decaying structure. The Blackwood Mill was a skeletal behemoth of rotting wood and rusted metal, its windows vacant eyes staring out into the bleak landscape. A thick layer of moss and lichen clung to its sides, giving it the appearance of something ancient and diseased. The air here was thick with the smell of damp earth, decay, and something else, something metallic and vaguely unsettling. "Mark," Daniel called out, his voice swallowed by the vastness of the clearing. No answer. He checked his watch. Mark was late. Typical. He circled the mill cautiously, the gravel crunching under his boots. The main entrance was a collapsed doorway, the wooden frame splintered and broken. A sense of unease crawled up his spine, a feeling of being watched. He peered into the gloom, but saw nothing but shadows and debris. "Mark, this isn't funny," he called again, his voice sharper this time. Still nothing. Against his better judgment, Daniel decided to go inside. He climbed over the debris, stepping into the mill's cavernous interior. Dust motes danced in the faint light filtering through gaps in the roof, illuminating the remnants of machinery. Broken gears, rusted pipes, and enormous silent saws frozen in midair. The air inside was thick with the smell of mildew and something acrid, like burnt metal. He called out Mark's name again, his voice echoing through the vast space. Silence answered him. As he ventured deeper, a chill permeated the air, a coldness that had nothing to do with the rain outside. He noticed scratch marks on the walls, deep gouges that looked like they'd been made by something large and powerful. He also saw strange symbols etched into the wood, swirling patterns he didn't recognize. The local legends whispered of pagan rituals performed here long before the mill was built. Daniel shivered, trying to dismiss it as his imagination running wild. High up, he found a set of muddy footprints leading towards a darker section of the mill. Mark's footprints, judging by the tread. A flicker of relief mixed with a growing sense of dread. Why wouldn't Mark answer? The footprints led him to a set of stairs, the wooden steps groaning ominously under his weight. He ascended cautiously, the air growing colder with each step. The silence here was absolute, a suffocating stillness that pressed against his ears. He reached the upper floor, a long open space with boarded-up windows. The air was thick with an almost palpable sense of despair, and then he saw it. In the center of the room, illuminated by a single shaft of light, was a pool of dark liquid, hot water. It was too thick, too viscous, and it shimmered with an unnatural sheen. The metallic scent he'd noticed earlier was stronger here, overpowering, and mixed with it was another smell, a sickly, sweet odor that made his stomach churn. Beside the pool lay something that made his blood run cold. A torn piece of clothing, unmistakably Mark's jacket. Next to it, a scattering of something red and glistening. He didn't want to look closer, but he couldn't tear his eyes away. A low growl echoed from the shadows at the far end of the room. It wasn't the growl of an animal. It was something deeper, something guttural and inhuman. Daniel froze, his heart hammering against his ribs. Slowly, something emerged from the darkness. It was tall and gaunt, its limbs unnaturally long and thin. Its skin was pale and stretched tight over sharp bones. Its eyes, wide and black, reflected the faint light like polished obsidian. It moved with a disconcerting fluidity, its joints bending at unnatural angles. Daniel's mind screamed. This wasn't human. This wasn't anything he understood. The creature tilted its head, its gaze fixed on him. The growl rumbled in its chest again, closer this time. He could see rows of sharp, pointed teeth in its partially open mouth. Terror lent him a burst of adrenaline. He turned and fled, stumbling back towards the stairs. He could hear the creature moving behind him, a soft, slithering sound that was somehow more terrifying than a roar. He plunged down the stairs, nearly losing his footing. He didn't dare look back. He scrambled through the debris of the entrance, bursting out into the rain-soaked clearing. He didn't stop running. He ran blindly through the trees, branches whipping at his face. The creature's horrifying image burned into his mind. He could hear it behind him, the rustling of leaves and the snapping of twigs. A relentless pursuit. He tripped and fell, the breath knocked out of him. He scrambled back to his feet, his lungs burning, his legs screaming in protest. He could feel the creature's presence, a cold, malevolent energy closing in. Desperation gave him strength. He kept running, pushing himself beyond his limits. He had to get out of the woods. He had to escape the Blackwood Mill and the thing that lurked within its decaying walls. He finally stumbled onto the logging road, his car a beacon of hope in the gloom. He fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking so violently he could barely grip them. He unlocked the door, threw himself inside, and slammed it shut. He jammed the key into the ignition, his hands still trembling. The engine sputtered and died. Panic clawed at his throat. He tried again, and again, the engine refusing to turn over. He looked in the rearview mirror. The creature was emerging from the trees, its black eyes gleaming in the rain. It was closer now, its unnatural gait covering ground with terrifying speed. He was trapped. He pounded on the steering wheel in frustration and fear. He could hear the soft thud of the creature's feet on the damp earth. Getting closer, he could see its shadow stretching across the clearing, long and distorted. He closed his eyes, bracing for the inevitable. He could feel the cold presence, the malevolence that radiated from it. He could smell the metallic tang of its presence, mixed with that sickly sweet odor. Then, a sound. Not the creature, a different sound. A metallic click, followed by the whirring of an engine. His engine. He instinctively kept trying, his fingers blindly turning the key. He floored the accelerator, the tires spinning in the mud. The car lurched forward, narrowly missing the creature as it reached the edge of the road. He didn't look back. He drove as fast as he could. The image of the creature seared into his retinas. He didn't stop until he was miles away. The city lights, a welcome beacon in the darkness. He never went back to Blackwood Mill. He never spoke of what he saw to anyone. Who would believe him? But sometimes, in the dead of night, he would wake up in a cold sweat, the metallic tang and the sickly sweet smell filling his nostrils, the image of those black empty eyes haunting his dreams. He knew, with a chilling certainty, that the woods held secrets best left undisturbed, and that the Blackwood Mill was not just an abandoned building, but a gateway to something ancient. Something hungry. And he knew, with a deep-seated fear that would never truly leave him, that Mark was never coming back. Story 11. The house stood on a promontory overlooking the churning gray sea, its silhouette a jagged tooth against the bruised twilight sky. Wind, relentless and cold, clawed at its weathered clapboard siding, whistling through gaps like the mournful cries of lost souls. Elias, a man whose academic fervor often outstripped his common sense, adjusted his thick-rimmed glasses and wrestled the heavy oak door open. He was here to study the folklore surrounding the Blackwood house, a local legend whispered with a mixture of fear and morbid curiosity. Tales of unexplained phenomena, strange disappearances, and a lingering sense of unease had clung to the property for generations. Most dismissed them as superstition, remnants of a more gullible age. Elias, however, saw fertile ground for anthropological research. The air inside was thick with the scent of damp wood and dust, a tangible weight that settled on his lungs. Moonlight, a pale and spectral visitor, filtered through grimy windows, casting long, dancing shadows that played tricks on the eye. The silence was profound, broken only by the rhythmic thump of his own heart and the keening wind outside. Elias unpacked his gear, his movements echoing strangely in the cavernous rooms. He was a man of logic, a skeptic by nature. He believed in empirical evidence, in measurable phenomena. Yet, even he couldn't entirely shake the prickling sensation on the back of his neck, the feeling of unseen eyes watching him. He started his exploration in the library, a room lined with shelves groaning under the weight of ancient, leather-bound books. The titles were faded and cryptic, hinting at forgotten knowledge and arcane practices. He ran a gloved finger along the spines, a thrill of anticipation mixed with a hint of apprehension coursing through him. As the hours deepened into night, the house seemed to come alive. Creaks and groans emanated from the walls, the settling sighs of an old structure, But sometimes, Elias could swear he heard something else. A faint rustling, a whisper too low to decipher. He dismissed it as the wind, the house playing its tricks. He found a worn leather journal tucked away on a high shelf, its pages yellowed and brittle. The handwriting was elegant, spidery. The ink faded to a sepia tone. The journal belonged to a woman named Eleanor, who had lived in the house in the late 19th century. Her entries began with descriptions of everyday life, of the beauty of the surrounding landscape, the joy of raising her family. Gradually, however, a darker tone crept in. Eleanor wrote of shadows that moved on their own, of whispers that seemed to come from the walls, of a growing feeling of dread that permeated the house. She described nightmares so vivid they left her trembling and sleepless. She spoke of a presence, something malevolent that she felt watching her, its cold gaze like a physical weight. Elias felt a chill despite the layers of clothing he wore. He was reading the words of a woman who had clearly been terrified, and the raw emotion in her writing was unsettling. He told himself it was just a story, the product of an overactive imagination, perhaps even the early signs of mental illness, but a nagging doubt lingered. Later that night, as a storm raged outside, lashing rain against the windows like skeletal fingers, Elias heard it clearly. A whisper. Not the wind, not the creaks of the house, a low, breathy sigh that seemed to originate from just beyond the closed door of his room. He froze, his heart hammering against his ribs. He told himself it was his imagination, the stress of the isolation, the influence of Eleanor's journal. He tried to sleep, but the unease was a tangible presence in the room. Every shadow seemed to writhe. Every creak resonated with unspoken menace. He kept the lamp burning, its weak light a fragile defiance against the encroaching darkness. Then he heard the footsteps, slow, deliberate, dragging steps on the floorboards above him. He held his breath, straining his ears. The footsteps paused directly above his head, then resumed, pacing back and forth, with a relentless, unnerving rhythm. He imagined some unseen entity pacing in the darkness, its presence heavy and suffocating. He couldn't take it anymore. He had to know. He grabbed the heavy iron poker he had found by the fireplace, its cold weight a small comfort in his trembling hand. He slowly opened the door, the hinges groaning in protest, the sound amplifying the silence that followed. The upstairs hallway was shrouded in shadows, the moonlight casting distorted shapes on the walls. The air was noticeably colder here, carrying a faint, metallic scent. The footsteps had stopped. He stood there, listening, every nerve ending screaming in protest. Then he saw it, a fleeting shadow, a flicker of movement at the end of the hallway. He raised the poker, his hand shaking. "Hello?" he called out, his voice a raspy whisper. Silence. He took a hesitant step forward, then another. As he reached the end of the hallway, he saw a door slightly ajar. A sliver of darkness beckoned him. He pushed it open, his breath catching in his throat. The room was empty, save for a rocking chair gently swaying back and forth in the center. The motion was slow, deliberate, as if someone had just stood up from it. He stared at the chair, transfixed, his mind struggling to reconcile the impossible. Suddenly, a gust of icy air swept through the room, extinguishing the lantern he carried, plunging him into absolute darkness. He gasped, dropping the poker with a clatter that seemed deafening in the silence. Panic clawed at his throat. He fumbled for his lighter, his fingers clumsy and unresponsive, as the small flame flickered to life, illuminating a tiny circle around him. He felt a cold touch on his neck, like a skeletal finger tracing his skin. He whirled around, his heart leaping into his mouth. Nothing. The room was still empty, but the feeling of being watched, the oppressive sense of a presence, was overwhelming. He backed away slowly, his eyes darting around the room, trying to pierce the darkness beyond the reach of the lighter's flame. He could hear his own ragged breathing, the frantic thumping of his heart. Then he saw it again. A shadow, this time more distinct. A human-like silhouette lurking in the corner of the room. It was tall and gaunt, its form indistinct in the darkness, but its presence undeniably menacing. Fear, raw and primal, gripped him. This was not his imagination, not the tricks of an old house. This was something else, something. Terrifyingly, he tried to speak, but his throat was constricted with terror. He backed away further, stumbling over something on the floor. He looked down and saw it. A child's doll, its porcelain face cracked and chipped, one eye missing. It stared up at him with a vacant, unsettling gaze. As he scrambled to his feet, the shadow moved. It glided across the room, silent and swift, its form becoming slightly clearer in the flickering light. He could see now that it was impossibly thin, its limbs elongated and distorted. Its head was tilted at an unnatural angle, and where its face should have been, there was only darkness. A wave of nausea washed over him. He wanted to scream, but no sound would come. He was paralyzed by fear, trapped in the gaze of something not of this world. The shadow reached out a long, skeletal hand, its fingers like brittle twigs. It moved towards him, its touch promising pain and oblivion. He closed his eyes, bracing for the inevitable. But the touch never came. Instead, he heard a whisper, a chilling, sibilant sound that seemed to burrow into his very soul. It was a single word, spoken in a voice that was both ancient and filled with immeasurable sorrow. Please. He didn't need to be told twice. He turned and fled, stumbling and falling, scrambling through the darkness. He didn't care about his equipment, his research, his scientific curiosity. All he wanted was to escape, to get out of that accursed house. He burst out into the storm, the wind and rain lashing his face, a welcome relief after the oppressive atmosphere inside. He didn't stop running until he reached the edge of the property, his lungs burning, his legs aching. He looked back at the house, its silhouette still looming against the stormy sky. It stood silent and watchful, a dark monument to the horrors within. He knew with a chilling certainty that he would never forget what he had experienced there. He had gone to the Blackwood house seeking answers, seeking to understand the folklore. He had found something far more terrifying, something that defied logic and reason. He had touched the edge of something ancient and malevolent, and he had barely escaped with his sanity. He never spoke of his experience publicly. Who would believe him? He was a scientist, a man of reason, but in the quiet hours of the night, in the dead silence before dawn, he would still hear the whispers, still feel the cold touch on his neck, and he knew, with a chilling certainty, that the Blackwood house, and whatever dwelled within, would forever haunt his dreams. Story 12. I stood in the doorway of an abandoned farmhouse, the splintering wood creaking beneath my feet, and peered into the darkness beyond. My breath quickened, a thick fog escaping my lips, mingling with the chill that seeped into every crevice of my bones. This place had long been left to rot, but curiosity, my old, foolish friend, had drawn me here. Why are we even doing this, Hannah? Jack's voice sliced through the stillness, his words laced with uncertainty. I could see him fidgeting behind me, his hands stuffed deep in his pockets. It's just an old house. It's not like anything's going to happen. I turned to face him, the dim moonlight illuminating the deep-set worry in his eyes. You said you wanted to prove you weren't scared. Come on, we can't back out now. That challenge hung in the air like the dust motes swirling around us. Jack's shoulders slumped, but I could see a flicker of determination igniting in his gaze. He was stubborn, after all. With a deep breath, I pushed the door open wider. It groaned in protest, and the sound echoed in the hollow darkness of the hallway, like a warning. "After you," I said, a playful smirk dancing on my lips. He hesitated, eyeing the shadows that loomed ominously within. I could almost hear his thoughts racing. Should he be brave, or just plain stupid? Finally, he stepped inside, the floorboards creaking under his weight. I followed closely, my heart pounding in sync with the rhythmic thump of my footsteps. The musty smell of decay enveloped us, thick and cloying. I squinted into the dark, straining to make out the shapes that danced just beyond the reach of the moonlight. There was something unsettling about the way the shadows twisted as if they were alive. "Why is it always the creepy old house in the woods?" Jack muttered, scanning the walls. "Why not a nice, cozy cabin by the lake?" "Wow. Because that wouldn't be nearly as fun." I laughed, though my voice trembled slightly. "Besides, haunted houses are a classic. We'll have a story to tell our friends." "Sure, if we survive." He shot back, a nervous grin spreading across his face. I rolled my eyes, but the playful banter fell flat in the oppressive atmosphere. The house felt like it was breathing, its very walls alive with the weight of secrets long buried. I could almost hear whispers, just out of reach, teasing the edge of my consciousness. We ventured deeper into the house, moving from room to room, our flashlights flickering in the gloom. The air crackled, thick with anticipation, as if the house itself was waiting for something to happen. "Look at this," I exclaimed, pointing to a tattered photograph hanging askew on the wall. A faded image of a family stared back, their smiles warped by time. Jack leaned in closer, his brow furrowing. "Maybe they got lost in here," he mused, a shiver tracing down his spine. I chuckled, but my laughter was cut short when a loud bang echoed from the kitchen. My heart leaped into my throat, and I felt the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "Did you hear that?" "Yeah, I did," Jack replied, his voice barely above a whisper. We exchanged a glance, the kind that spoke volumes without uttering a word. I felt a pull, the magnetic force drawing me towards the source of the noise. "Let's check it out." Jack hesitated, his expression a mix of fear and excitement. "We should probably just stop being a chicken. It's probably just a raccoon or something." I rolled my eyes again, but I could feel the thrill of fear and curiosity battling within me. Reluctantly, he nodded, and we crept toward the kitchen, the floor creaking ominously beneath our feet. The room was dark, the only light coming from the faint beam of my flashlight. It flickered like a faulty bulb, casting erratic shadows that made the walls seem to shift and sway. Suddenly, the light caught something moving at the corner of the room. I gasped, my heart racing as the beam illuminated a small object. A metal pan lying on the floor, overturned. "See? Just a pan," I said, though my voice quivered. Jack let out a shaky laugh, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Right, just a pan. Nothing to worry about." Just then, a low moan echoed through the house, sending chills racing down my spine. It was distant, almost a whisper, but it was enough to freeze us in place. "What was that?" Jack asked, his voice a mere breath, swallowed hard, the mouth suddenly dry. "Maybe it's just the wind, or a house settling." But even I could hear the quiver in my own voice. "Yeah, right," he muttered, taking a cautious step back. The moan came again, louder this time, and it reverberated through the walls, wrapping around us like a cold embrace. It felt wrong, like a warning. "We should go," Jack said, voice strained. But before I could respond, a thud echoed from the upstairs. My heart raced as I exchanged another frantic glance with Jack. We both knew we shouldn't investigate further, But that same insatiable curiosity gnawed at me. "Stay here," I whispered, inching toward the staircase. "Are you insane?" he hissed, panic bubbling in his voice. "Hannah, we don't know what's up there. I have to see," I insisted, my resolve hardening. I could feel the pull of whatever haunted this place, an inexplicable urge to uncover its secrets. With a final glance back at Jack, who stood rooted to the spot, his fear palpable, I began my ascent. The staircase creaked under my weight, each step a reminder of the age and decay surrounding me. When I reached the top, the hallway stretched before me, cloaked in darkness. The walls were lined with doors, and an unsettling silence hung in the air. I hesitated, my heart pounding like a drum in my chest. A soft hum drifted from one of the rooms, hauntingly beautiful yet laced with an undercurrent of dread. I didn't recognize the melody, but it tugged at something deep within me. I felt drawn to it, as if it were calling my name. I turned the knob slowly, the door creaking open to reveal a child's bedroom, frozen in time. Dust motes danced in the beam of my flashlight, illuminating a small bed with a frayed blanket and a worn-out doll propped against the pillow. The hum grew louder, more insistent, and I stepped inside, my breath hitching in my throat. "Hello?" I called, my voice wavering. A rush of cold air swept through the room, sending a shiver down my spine. The doll's eyes seemed to glint with life, and I felt a pang of unease settling deep in my stomach. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind me with a deafening bang, and I whipped around, panic flooding my senses. "Jack!" I screamed, my voice echoing off the walls. There was no response, only the hum, now transformed into a soft, eerie laughter that filled the room. It wrapped around me, pulling me deeper into the darkness. I pressed my back against the door, my heart racing wildly. "Let me out!" I shouted, my voice rising in desperation. The laughter grew louder, more mocking, and I felt a presence lurking just beyond the edges of my vision. Shadows twisted and danced, and I could almost make out a figure standing in the corner, shrouded in darkness. I fumbled for the doorknob, my hands shaking as I tried to turn it. It wouldn't budge. "Jack!" I cried again, panic rising like bile in my throat. But the laughter transformed into a chilling scream, piercing through the air like a knife. I stumbled back, terror flooding my veins as the figure stepped into the light. I gasped, my heart dropping as I recognized the familiar face twisted in agony. "Help me!" Jack's voice echoed, distorted and pained. "Hannah, please!" The room spun around me, the walls closing in as I fought against the fear threatening to swallow me whole. "Jack!" I screamed, pounding on the door, but it was useless. The shadows closed in, wrapping around me like a suffocating blanket. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the laughter stopped. The door creaked open, and I stumbled out into the hallway, gasping for breath. Jack stood at the end of the corridor, his face pale and drawn. "What happened?" he asked, concern etched into his features. "I don't know," I stammered, glancing back at the bedroom. It was like something was in there with me. "Let's get out of here," he urged, and I nodded, relief flooding through me. We raced down the stairs, the house seemingly alive with energy, as if it were angry at our intrusion. The walls trembled, and the very ground beneath us shook. As we burst out the front door into the cold night air, the moon hung high above us, a silvery sentinel. We didn't stop running until we reached the edge of the woods, panting and breathless. "What the hell was that?" Jack gasped, his eyes wide with fear. I shook my head, trying to process what had just happened. "I don't know, but we're never coming back here again." But even as I said the words, I felt a whisper of doubt. The house had reached out to me, had offered a glimpse into something dark and mysterious. I had tasted the thrill of fear, and it lingered like a haunting melody in my mind. As I glanced back at the silhouette of the farmhouse looming behind us, I knew I would return. Curiosity, That relentless beast would always call me back. Story 13. The salt spray stung Elias's face, a familiar welcome to the jagged spit of rock that housed the North Point lighthouse. Fog, thick as cotton wool, clung to the craggy coastline, muffling the ceaseless roar of the Atlantic. He hauled his duffel bag onto the slick, seaweed-strewn path, the lighthouse looming above him like a skeletal finger pointing accusingly at the gray sky. His predecessor, Old Man Hemlock, hadn't said a word when Elias met him at the ferry dock, just a skeletal hand extended, a greasy key clutched in its palm, and eyes that held the weary knowledge of too many lonely nights. Hemlock had simply pointed towards the island, his silence more unsettling than any dire warning. Elias, a man who prided himself on his practicality and his disdain for superstition, scoffed internally at the unsettling feeling Hemlock had left him with. He was a reef keeper, filling in for a month while the regular man was on leave, a month of solitude. The rhythmic sweep of the lamp, and the elemental fury of the ocean, that was all. The heavy oak door of the lighthouse groaned in protest as he pushed it open. The circular entrance hall was damp and smelled faintly of mildew. And something else, metallic like old blood. He shook his head, attributing it to the sea air in his overly imaginative mind. The interior was as expected, a spiraling stone staircase ascending the tower, punctuated by the heavy iron doors of each level. He claimed the small living quarters on the third floor, a sparsely furnished space with a narrow bed, a rickety table, and a single grime-streaked window overlooking the choppy sea. The first few days were uneventful. He meticulously checked the lamp, polished the brass fittings, and logged the weather conditions. The solitude was initially a welcome change from the bustling mainland. He read, listened to the radio, and even attempted sketching the dramatic coastline, though his artistic talents were laughably limited. It was on the fourth night that the subtle unease began to creep in. A floorboard creaked on the second level, a distinct, sharp sound that jolted him from his reading. He held his breath, listening intently. Silence. He dismissed it as the old building settling, but it happened again the next night and the night after. Always on the second floor, always a single distinct creak. He started sleeping with a flashlight beside his bed, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs at every stray noise. Then came the whispers, faint, sibilant sounds that seemed to slither from the very stone of the tower. He'd be sitting at his table, the beam of the lamp cutting a swathe through the fog outside, when he'd catch them just at the edge of hearing. He'd strain, trying to decipher words, but they were just murmurs, too low, too indistinct. They sounded like complaints. He started avoiding the second floor, a ridiculous impulse he acknowledged but couldn't overcome. The creaking always came from that level, and the whispers seemed to emanate from it. He'd find himself holding his breath as he passed the door on the staircase, his hand instinctively tightening on the iron railing. One foggy afternoon, while inspecting the lamp room at the tower's peak, he found it. Scratched into the thick glass of the lantern housing, almost hidden by years of grime, were names, faint, spidery etchings. He wiped the glass clean, his breath catching in his throat as he deciphered them. Thomas Albright, 1888. Samuel Pinter, 1923. John Davies, 1957. And then, etched deeper, almost violently, these were the names of previous keepers. He knew it instinctively. Men who had manned this lonely post for years, their lives inextricably linked to the relentless rhythm of the lamp. That night, the whispers were louder. He could almost make out words now, fragmented and desperate. Cold, so cold. The light, don't let it die. The creaking on the second floor was relentless, a constant, rhythmic protest. He huddled in his bed, the flashlight clutched in his trembling hand, his eyes darting towards the ceiling, imagining whatever horrors lurked beneath him. He decided he had to know, despite the fear that gnawed at his insides. He couldn't bear the uncertainty any longer. Armed with a heavy wrench from his toolkit, he descended the spiraling stairs, his footsteps echoing eerily in the sudden, oppressive silence that had fallen over the lighthouse. The door to the second floor was heavy, the iron cold beneath his fingers. He pushed it open slowly, the hinges groaning like a tortured soul. The room was identical to his own, save for a single unsettling detail. In the center of the room, a rocking chair swayed gently back and forth, as if recently occupied. The air in the room was frigid, in stark contrast to the dampness of the rest of the tower. He cautiously entered the room, the wrench held high. The rocking chair continued its silent dance. He circled it slowly, his eyes scanning the room for any sign of an intruder. Nothing. Just the empty chair moving on its own. A whisper, closer this time, brushed against his ear, sending a shiver down his spine. Lonely, he whirled around, his heart leaping into his throat. Nothing. The whisper had been right next to him. He backed away slowly, his eyes fixed on the rocking chair. As he reached the doorway, a faint scratching sound came from behind him. He turned. On the wall, as if carved by an unseen hand, words began to appear in the dust. "You're one of us now." He bolted, slamming the door shut and fumbling with the heavy bolt. He didn't stop running until he was back in his own room, the door barricaded with his table. The whispers intensified, pressing against the door, seeping through the very walls. The creaking below was a frantic, insistent pounding. He could hear something dragging itself across the floor below, a slow, deliberate scrape that made his teeth ache. He knew, with a chilling certainty, that he wasn't alone in the lighthouse, that he was sharing this isolated tower with something else, something that had claimed the previous keepers, something that was now reaching for him. He considered trying to radio for help, but the radio was in the room below, on the second floor. He was trapped. Hours crawled by, each tick of his watch an agonizing reminder of his predicament. The noises continued, a symphony of dread, whispers, creaks, the dragging sound, and now a low, guttural moan that seemed to vibrate through the stone. As dawn began to paint the eastern sky with streaks of gray and pink, the sounds subsided. A fragile silence descended upon the lighthouse. Exhausted and terrified, Elias slumped against his barricaded door, the wrench still clutched in his hand. He knew it wasn't over. Whatever was in the lighthouse was still there, waiting. He had to get out. When the fog thinned enough to afford some visibility, he made his move. He cautiously opened his door, the silence outside even more unnerving than the noises of the night. He crept down the stairs, avoiding the second floor entirely. He reached the main entrance, his hand trembling as he reached for the bolt. It was then he saw it, scratched into the inside of the heavy oak door, fresh and raw, were more words. "Where do you think you're going?" He recoiled, his breath catching in his throat. He was trapped. They didn't want him to leave. Desperation clawed at him. He had to get to the lamp room. The light. The whispers had mentioned the light. He raced up the stairs, his fear giving him an adrenaline surge. He reached the lamp room, the massive lens gleaming dully in the dawn light. He frantically checked the fuel levels, the gears, everything. It was all in perfect working order. Then he saw it. A figure standing in the corner of the lamp room, shrouded in shadow. It was tall and gaunt, its limbs elongated and distorted. Its face was hidden in the gloom, but Elias could feel its gaze, cold and hungry. He stumbled back, a strangled cry escaping his lips. The figure glided towards him, its movements unnatural, silent. The metal, the thaw, towards him, the light. It rasped, its voice like the scraping of stones. Keep it burning. Elias understood then. The keepers, the whispers, the never-leave message. They weren't malevolent, they were bound to the lighthouse, their existence tied to the beam of light that pierced the darkness. They weren't trying to harm him. They were warning him, protecting him. The figure gestured towards the sea, its skeletal finger pointing towards a dark shape on the horizon. A ship sailing blindly through the dissipating fog. If the light went out, he scrambled to the controls, double-checking the lamp, ensuring its steady, unwavering glow. The figure faded back into the shadows, its presence less threatening now, more sorrowful. Sorrowful. Elias stayed at the North Point lighthouse for his allotted month. He still heard the whispers, the creaks, but now they felt different. Not malevolent, but like the sighs of weary guardians. He understood their burden and their eternal vigil. When the relief ship arrived, Elias didn't hesitate to leave. But as the lighthouse receded into the fog, he looked back, a strange sense of respect and understanding replacing the terror. He knew the secrets it held, the restless souls bound to its lonely vigil. And he knew, with a chilling certainty, that the light at North Point would never go out, not while its keepers, living and dead, had anything to say about it. Story 14. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving me to navigate the encroaching darkness with only a flickering flashlight. My heart thudded against my ribs, each beat an ominous reminder of the tales I'd heard about this place. Just a stupid dare, I muttered to myself, trying to shake off the creeping dread that crawled up my spine. Go in, take a few pictures, and come back. Easy. But as I stepped onto the cracked stone porch, the ominous creaks of the house greeted me, the sound echoing like a long-forgotten memory. I shined my light through the broken windows, casting a beam that danced across the dust-laden furniture inside. The air was thick with a musty smell, a mix of mildew and something else, something rancid that made my stomach churn. God, what did I get myself into? I whispered, my voice barely cutting through the suffocating silence. I hesitated, my fingers hovering over the doorknob. It was cold and rusty, refusing to turn with ease. With a determined shove, I pushed it open, and it groaned like a wounded animal. The door creaked as I stepped inside, and I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was watching me. The flashlight beam illuminated the peeling wallpaper, faded floral patterns that had long lost their vibrancy. Shadows danced in the corners of the room, playing tricks on my mind. I took a deep breath and stepped further in, the floorboards groaning under my weight. As I ventured deeper, I heard a soft sound. Is someone there? The question slipped from my lips, almost a plea. Silence answered, and I pressed on. I aimed my light toward the staircase, its banister draped in cobwebs. A chill ran through me, but curiosity pushed me up the stairs, one cautious step after another. Each creak felt like a warning, but I was too far gone to turn back now. Just a few more pictures, then I'm out, I said, trying to reassure myself. On the second floor, I discovered a hallway lined with doors, each one closed and shrouded in darkness. I chose the first door on the right, gripping the knob tightly. It opened with a reluctant groan, and I stumbled into what looked like a child's bedroom. The air was colder here, and a shiver rolled down my spine. A small bed, its sheets long since turned to tatters, sat against one wall. On the nightstand, a porcelain doll with cracked features stared up at me, its smile unsettling in the dim light. Ugh, creepy, I breathed, taking a step back. I turned to leave, but then I heard it. A soft giggle like a child playing hide and seek. My heart raced. Hello. Is anyone there? I called, my voice echoing through the stillness. Another giggle, this time louder, rang out from the opposite end of the hallway. It was playful, innocent, and yet it sent chills down my spine. I stepped into the hallway, my flashlight flickering as if in warning. Seriously, guys, this is funny, I shouted, frustration boiling over. The laughter stopped abruptly, replaced by an eerie silence that felt almost oppressive. My breath quickened as I turned to face the end of the hallway. A shadow flitted across the wall, and I stumbled back, heart racing. What the hell was that? I strained to see, but the darkness swallowed everything. I took a hesitant step forward, then another, each footfall echoing in the silence. I reached the end of the hall and stood before the last door, its surface marred with deep scratches. Okay. Deep breaths, I murmured, trying to steady myself. A swift motion, I yanked the door open, and it crashed against the wall, sending dust particles swirling in the beam of my flashlight. The room was empty, but it had a different feel to it, like something was lingering just out of sight. Is anyone here? I called, my voice shaking slightly. A chill swept through the room, and I shivered. Just as I turned to leave, the door slammed shut behind me with a resounding bang. No! No! I screamed, pounding on the door. Let me out! I screamed, pounding on the door. Let me out! My voice was frantic, and I could hear the panic rising in my chest. The coldness intensified, wrapping around me like a vice. I pressed my back against the door, my heart racing. I could hear whispers now, soft and unintelligible, swirling around me like a whirlwind. Get out! Get out! They seemed to chant, each word laced with malevolence. In my blind panic, I threw myself against the door, my shoulder colliding with the wood. It rattled but held firm. I pounded again, adrenaline coursing through my veins. Help! Someone help me! The whispers grew louder, their tone shifting from a chant to a cacophony of laughter. I slid down to the floor, my breath coming in ragged gasps as I hugged my knees to my chest. The laughter was mocking, cruel, and I squeezed my eyes shut, wishing it all away. Then, a soft touch grazed my arm, and I opened my eyes to see the doll from the other room sitting beside me. Its cracked smile impossibly wide. Save us, it whispered, its voice sweet, but laced with an edge of malice. Get away from me, I screamed, scrambling backward until my back hit the door. Don't you want to stay? It asked, tilting its head. Forever? Frantic, I pushed against the door, and this time, it gave way. I stumbled back into the hallway, gasping for breath. The laughter followed me, echoing off the walls as I dashed toward the staircase. I couldn't hear my own heartbeat over the cacophony of sounds, whispers, giggles, and that dreadful laughter. The house seemed alive, the walls closing in around me, and I ran faster, nearly tripping over the stairs. As I reached the front door, I pulled at the knob, my hands shaking. It wouldn't budge. No, no, I yelled, throwing my weight against it. Stay with us, the voices echoed, filled with a twisted kind of joy. Let me out, I cried, panic clawing at my throat. I could feel the air growing colder, the shadows creeping closer. Finally, with one last desperate shove, the door swung open, and I tumbled onto the porch. The night air hitting me like a wave, I bolted down the steps, my feet pounding against the ground as I ran, not looking back. The forest loomed around me, dark and foreboding, but I didn't care. I sprinted, branches whipping at my face, the laughter fading behind me into the night. Wow. the laughter fading behind me into the night. "Just keep running," I gasped, pushing myself forward. "Just keep going." The trees thinned, and I burst into the clearing, the moonlight washing over me like a blanket. I paused, hands on my knees, gasping for breath. The estate loomed behind me, dark and silent now, but I could still feel its presence, a hungry shadow lingering just out of sight. I turned to look back, heart pounding, and for a fleeting moment, I thought I saw a figure standing in the doorway, a small hand raised in a wave. "Come back and play," it whispered. The sound carried on the wind, chilling me to my core. I turned and ran, the forest swallowing me whole, the echoes of laughter ringing in my ears, promising that this wasn't over. Not yet. Visi, as, au, pose, au, du, la, vi, be, stress, try. It was the kind of place where forgotten stories clung to every chipped teacup and tarnished candlestick, a haven for nostalgia, and sometimes something much darker. Elias, a man who found solace in the echoes of the past, was drawn to a peculiar object tucked away on a high shelf. A small wooden dollhouse. It wasn't its quaint architecture or the tiny hand-painted furniture that captivated him. It was an unsettling stillness that emanated from it, a silence that seemed heavier than the surrounding whisper of forgotten time. The house was Victorian in style, its paint faded and peeled, with darkened windows that seemed to peer out with vacant eyes. He asked the shop owner, a woman with eyes as old as the relics she peddled, about it. That one," she said, her voice raspy, like dry leaves skittering across pavement. "Been here years. No one seems to want it." She paused, her gaze distant. "Some things, they hold on to their stories too tightly, I reckon." Elias, intrigued by her cryptic words, purchased the dollhouse. He felt a peculiar pull towards it, a morbid curiosity that whispered promises of secrets untold. Back in his apartment, a small, dimly lit space filled with his own collection of historical curiosities, he placed the dollhouse on a sturdy table. The first few days were uneventful. He'd examined the miniature rooms, a parlor with a tiny threadbare rug, a kitchen with meticulously crafted pots and pans, a bedroom with a four-poster bed draped in faded lace. He imagined the lives that might have unfolded within its walls, the laughter, the tears, the mundane moments that build a life. Then, the whispers began. They were faint, almost imperceptible, like the rustling of cloth in an empty room. Elias initially dismissed them as the building settling, the wind whistling through the window cracks. But the whispers grew, coalescing into something resembling hushed conversations, too low to understand, yet undeniably present. They seemed to emanate from the dollhouse. One evening, as dusk painted the sky in shades of bruised purple, Elias sat across from the dollhouse, a glass of wine in hand. The whispers intensified. He leaned closer, straining to decipher the fragments of sound. He thought he heard a child's whimper, a woman's sigh, a man's low growl, a chill deeper than the autumn air. Settled in his bones, he began to observe the dollhouse with a more critical eye. He noticed details he hadn't before. A tiny stain on the parlor floor, a dark reddish hue that looked disturbingly like dried blood, a small wooden rocking horse in the nursery, positioned facing the wall, a miniature knife glinting faintly in the kitchen drawer, far too realistic for a child's toy. Sleep became a battlefield. Elias was plagued by nightmares filled with shadowy figures moving within the dollhouse, their faces obscured, their actions menacing. He'd wake in a cold sweat, the faint whispers echoing in his ears, the line between his waking life and the horrors of his dreams blurred, and the dollhouse became the epicenter of his growing dread. He tried to rationalize it. Perhaps the old wood was reacting to the temperature changes, producing subtle sounds. Maybe he was simply stressed, his imagination running wild. But deep down, a primal fear gnawed at him, a certainty that something malevolent resided within the miniature dwelling. One night, he awoke to complete silence. The whispers were gone, but relief washed over him, quickly replaced by a prickle of unease. He got out of bed and approached the dollhouse. The front door, previously always slightly ajar, was now firmly closed. He reached out hesitantly and pushed it open. The interior was bathed in an unnatural darkness, even darker than the shadows cast by the dim streetlights filtering through his window. Then he saw it. Inside the parlor, the tiny figures of a man and a woman were now standing, their backs to him. They hadn't been there before. He was certain of it. They were crudely made, their features rudimentary, but their posture conveyed a chilling stillness, like statues waiting for the right moment to move. He backed away slowly, his heart hammering against his ribs. He tried to convince himself it was a trick of the light, a figment of his overwrought imagination. But as he watched, the male figure slowly turned its head. A single black bead served as its eye, and it seemed to lock onto Elias with an unnerving intensity. That night, the whispers returned, louder, clearer, no longer fragmented. He could understand them now. They were filled with anger, with sorrow, with a desperate, suffocating rage. They spoke of betrayal, of loss, of a child taken too soon. Elias felt a presence in his apartment, a cold, oppressive weight that seemed to press down on him. Shadows flickered in the corners of his eyes, and he could hear faint scraping sounds coming from the dollhouse. He started seeing things out of the corner of his eye, fleeting glimpses of movement, the flash of something small and dark darting between the miniature furniture. He knew he had to get rid of it. He tried to pack it away, but his hands trembled so violently he couldn't manage it. He considered smashing it, burning it, but a deep-seated fear held him back. It felt as though the dollhouse held a grip on him, a silent promise of retribution if he dared to destroy its prison. One evening he found a new addition to the dollhouse family, a small, childlike figure, dressed in a miniature white gown, stood between the man and the woman. Its face was blank, devoid of features, yet it radiated an unbearable sadness. As Elias stared at it, he felt a wave of nausea wash over him. The whispers became a chorus of lament, a mournful wail that seemed to penetrate his very soul. He started losing track of time. Days blended into nights, marked only by the shifting intensity of the whispers and the subtle changes within the dollhouse. He saw the miniature knife move from the kitchen to the man's hand in the parlor. He saw the woman's figure turn towards the nursery, her head tilted as if listening for a sound that would never come. Fear had become his constant companion, a cold, clammy hand gripping his heart. He was trapped in his apartment, a prisoner in his own home, haunted by the silent screams emanating from the small wooden house. The final straw came one morning when he woke to find the dollhouse door wide open. The three figures were gone. Panic seized him. He frantically searched the apartment, his eyes darting into every corner, every shadow. Then he saw it, a tiny footprint, no bigger than his thumbnail, was imprinted in the dust on his bedside table. And on his pillow, nestled beside his head, was the miniature knife. The whispers were deafening now, a cacophony of sorrow and rage that echoed within his skull. He felt a cold breath on the back of his neck, a presence so close he could almost feel it touching him. He turned slowly, his heart pounding in his chest. Standing in the dim light of his bedroom, their forms wavering and indistinct, were the three figures from the dollhouse. They were no longer miniature. They were life-sized, their eyes burning with an ancient sorrow, their expressions contorted in silent suffering. The man raised the tiny knife, now impossibly large and sharp. The woman reached out a skeletal hand, her touch promising an eternity of chilling loneliness. And the child? The child simply stood there, its blank face a terrifying void, its silence the most deafening sound of all. Elias screamed, a raw, primal sound of pure terror. The scream was abruptly cut short. The antique shop owner found his body a week later. His apartment was undisturbed, everything in its place, except for a small wooden dollhouse sitting on his bedside table. The front door was slightly ajar, and from within a faint, almost imperceptible whisper could be heard. The sound of a child humming a sad, forgotten lullaby. The dust motes danced in a single shaft of sunlight, oblivious to the horror that lingered in the air. The dollhouse had found a new story to hold on to, and this time it wouldn't let go. Story 16. The wind howled like a tormented soul. As I made my way down the desolate street, the dim glow of the street lamps casting eerie shadows that danced on the cracked pavement. I had heard the stories about the old Whitmore house at the end of the lane, a crumbling relic of a time long past. The locals whispered of strange noises, flickering lights, and a lingering sense of dread that seemed to ooze from its very walls. But curiosity had always been my downfall, and tonight it pulled me toward that cursed place. As I approached, the air grew thick with an unsettling stillness. The house loomed before me, its once grand facade now a grotesque mockery of itself, with broken windows like hollow eyes staring into nothingness. I took a deep breath, the chill biting at my lungs, and stepped onto the overgrown path. Each crunch of the gravel beneath my feet echoed like a countdown to something terrible. "Why are you doing this?" I whispered to myself, shaking my head as if that would dispel the creeping anxiety. But deep down I knew. I needed to know if the tales were true. The front door creaked open, almost inviting me in. Creak! I winced at the sound, glancing over my shoulder, half expecting someone to be standing there, watching. But the street was empty, the night swallowing all. Inside, the air was stale and heavy, a thick blanket of dust covering every surface. I flicked on my flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness like a knife. The beam illuminated faded wallpaper peeling away from the walls, revealing ghostly patterns beneath. "Ugh," I muttered, stepping further inside. "This place is a dump." A sudden scuttling noise made me freeze. "What was that?" I breathed, my heart racing. I aimed the light toward the source, revealing a scurrying rat darting across the floor. I exhaled, relieved, but the sound of my own breath echoed back, mocking me. I moved cautiously through the living room, the old furniture draped in sheets like forgotten memories. A soft hum filled the air, almost melodic, yet it sent shivers down my spine. "Hello?" I called, my voice trembling. The hum faded, replaced by a low moan that seemed to resonate from the walls themselves. My skin prickled. "Is anyone there?" Silence answered, thick and suffocating. I took a step back, my foot brushing against something cold and metallic. I shone my light down to find an old pocket watch, its glass cracked but the hand still ticking, frozen at midnight. "What the hell?" I whispered, my pulse quickening. The moaning returned, louder now, echoing through the empty halls. I felt a pull, an invisible thread tugging at my very essence. My feet moved of their own accord, leading me deeper into the house. Each step felt heavier, as if the very ground was trying to hold me back. "Please," Just leave, I shouted, though I wasn't sure who I was addressing. The walls? The unseen presence that lingered, the moaning crescendo, morphing into a chorus of tortured souls. No! Stop! I shouted again, driven by a primal fear. The floorboards creaked underfoot, a symphony of despair, as I reached the staircase. My heart pounded in my chest, a relentless drumbeat urging me to run. But I couldn't. Something compelled me to ascend. God, what am I doing? I muttered, gripping the banister. At the top of the stairs, the hallway stretched out before me, lined with doors that looked like gaping mouths, ready to swallow me whole. The moaning intensified, a desperate plea echoing in my mind. I approached the first door, hesitating. What's behind you? I asked, half expecting an answer. But all I received was silence. I pushed the door open, the hinges screeching in protest. The room was dark, the only light filtering through the grime-coated window. I stepped inside, the floorboards groaning beneath me, and immediately felt a chill creep up my spine. Why are you here? A voice whispered, barely audible, sending a jolt of fear through me. I spun around, flashlight trembling in hand. Who's there? No answer came, just the sound of my own breathing, rapid and frantic. I turned back to the room, and that's when I saw it. A figure shrouded in shadows, its face obscured. Help me? It moaned, the voice raspy, like dry leaves rustling in the wind. Help you? I echoed, my voice a whisper. What do you mean? The figure stepped closer, and I could make out its features. Hollow eyes, gaunt cheeks, and a mouth that twisted into a pained expression. They won't let me go, it rasped, reaching out a skeletal hand. Please, you have to help me. I took a step back, my instincts screaming at me to run. I can't help you, I stammered, fear clawing at my throat. What do you want from me? Free me, it urged, its voice rising in desperation. You're the only one. The air grew heavy, and I felt the walls close in around me. I turned, racing back to the hallway, the figure's moans echoing behind me, growing fainter but infinitely more haunting. I sprinted down the corridor, the doorways blurring as I ran. Get out! Get out! I chanted, my heart hammering against my ribcage. As I reached the staircase, I stumbled, nearly falling. The sound of laughter, high-pitched and mocking, filled the air, wrapping around me like a noose. Oh, sweet child, you should have stayed away. It taunted. Shut up! I screamed, barreling down the stairs, my footsteps echoing in the empty space. I burst through the front door, the night air hitting me like a wave of clarity. The laughter faded, replaced by the wind's mournful song. I didn't stop running until I reached the street, gasping for breath. The old Whitmore house stood silent behind me, its dark windows like empty eyes watching my retreat. I turned back, my heart still racing. And for a fleeting moment, I thought I saw the figure standing at the window, its hand pressed against the glass, pleading. I stumbled back, my mind racing. I had to know what I had just witnessed. Why did I go in there? I panted, shaking my head as if that could erase the terror I had just faced. I fished my phone out of my pocket, hands trembling as I searched for answers. The light from the screen illuminated the darkness, revealing the cracked pavement beneath my feet. I typed Whitmore House stories into the search bar, praying for some explanation. My heart sank as I read the headlines: missing persons, strange occurrences, and tales of a spirit trapped within the house, doomed to wander the halls, seeking help that never came. God, what did I do? I whispered, dread pooling in my stomach. The figure's hollow eyes haunted me, the urgency in its voice echoing in my mind. I rubbed my temples, trying to shake off the images, but they clung to me like tendrils of smoke. A sudden crash from behind me made me jump. I spun around, heart racing as I scanned the street, but nothing moved. The wind rustled through the trees, and for a moment, I thought I heard that laughter again, soft and sinister. "Get a grip," I muttered to myself, breathing deeply. "It's just your imagination." I took a step forward, but a chill washed over me, and I hesitated, looking back at the house. What if I hadn't seen the last of it? With trembling fingers, I dialed my friend, Ethan. "Hey, it's me," I said when he picked up. "You won't believe what happened." "Is it about the Whitmore house?" he asked, his voice teasing. "Did you see a ghost?" "No, I'm serious," I shouted, glancing back at the dark silhouette of the house. "Wow, I think there's something trapped in there. It asked me for help." "Right," he said, skepticism dripping from his words. "You probably just scared yourself. Why don't you come over and we can watch a movie or something?" "I don't know, I can't just forget about it," I insisted, my voice rising. "I think it's real, Ethan. I need to find out more. I need to help it." Okay, he said, his tone shifting to concern. "Just don't go back there alone. Let's figure this out together." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "Yeah, okay. Just hurry." As I hung up, a sense of urgency swelled within me. I glanced back at the Whitmore house once more, its dark windows like the gaping maw of a beast. The figure's plea echoed in my mind, and I knew I couldn't ignore it. Maybe I was foolish, or maybe I was brave. But whatever the case, my heart was set. I couldn't leave that spirit behind, not when it had reached out to me. I took one last breath, squared my shoulders, and started walking back, the wind at my back urging me forward into the unknown. Story 17. In the quaint town of Fairhaven, there was a beautiful Victorian mansion that had been passed down through generations of the wealthy and eccentric Breckenridge family. The mansion, known as Ravencrest, was said to be haunted by the ghost of the cruel and tyrannical matriarch, Elizabeth Breckenridge. Many had claimed to see her ghostly figure wandering the halls, heard her eerie laughter echoing through the walls, and felt her icy presence in the dead of night. Despite the rumors, the young couple, Sarah and Michael, decided to take up residence in Ravencrest, eager to restore it to its former glory. They were aware of the house's dark history, but were not superstitious, and believed they could turn the place into a warm and welcoming home. As they began to settle in, they noticed strange occurrences. Lights flickered, doors slammed shut, and objects moved on their own. Sarah, a sensible and pragmatic woman, brushed it off as the house settling and the quirks that come with living in an old home. However, Michael couldn't shake off the feeling of being watched, and began to sense a malevolent presence in the house. One stormy night, as they were sitting in the living room, they heard a loud crash coming from the upstairs bedroom. Michael rushed up to investigate, with Sarah following close behind. As they entered the room, they saw a mirror had fallen and shattered into pieces. But as they looked closer, they noticed something written in the dust on the surface of the mirror. It read, "Leave this place, or suffer consequences." Sarah and Michael were startled, but decided it was just a prank and cleaned up the mess. However, the strange occurrences continued to escalate. Their electronics would malfunction, cold spots appeared in different rooms, and they would hear footsteps pacing back and forth in the attic. One day, Sarah decided to do some research on the Breckenridge family and discovered the dark and twisted history of Elizabeth Breckenridge. She was a cruel woman who had mistreated her servants, was accused of murdering her husband, and was believed to have practiced dark arts. Sarah couldn't help but feel a sense of unease as she read about the atrocities Elizabeth had committed. As the days went by, Sarah began to experience strange dreams where she would see Elizabeth's ghostly figure looming over her, whispering threats and taunts. Sarah would wake up in a cold sweat, her heart pounding in her chest. Michael noticed Sarah's change in behavior and suggested they leave Ravencrest. But Sarah was determined to face her fears and prove that she was not a coward. One night, as Sarah was alone in the house, she heard a loud scream coming from the basement. She cautiously made her way down the stairs and was confronted by Elizabeth's ghostly figure. The spirit reached out and touched Sarah's face, leaving a cold and clammy handprint on her cheek. Sarah felt a sudden wave of fear and despair wash over her, and she collapsed onto the floor. Michael returned home to find Sarah unconscious and immediately called for an ambulance. As Sarah was taken to the hospital, Michael stayed behind to pack their belongings and leave Ravencrest for good. However, as he was about to leave, he heard a chilling laugh echoing through the halls. Michael turned around and saw Elizabeth's ghostly figure standing in the doorway. Her eyes locked onto his. Michael quickly left the house, leaving behind all their possessions, and drove to the hospital to be by Sarah's side. Sarah regained consciousness and told Michael about her encounter with Elizabeth's ghost. They both knew they couldn't stay in Fairhaven any longer, and decided to move to a different town, far away from Ravencrest. Years went by, and Sarah and Michael never spoke about their experience in Ravencrest. However, they would always remember the chilling presence of Elizabeth's ghostly figure and the terror that had consumed their lives. The memories of their time in Ravencrest would haunt them forever, a constant reminder of the darkness that had once lived in that beautiful Victorian mansion. And so, Ravencrest remained empty, its doors forever closed to the outside world, shrouded in mystery and fear. It stood as a reminder of the darkness that lay dormant within its walls, waiting for the next unsuspecting soul to cross its path. In the end, Sarah and Michael's story served as a cautionary tale, a reminder to always approach the unknown with caution and respect. For in the quiet town of Fairhaven, the ghost of Elizabeth Breckenridge remained a constant and chilling presence, a reminder of the darkness that exists in the world, hidden in the shadows, waiting to be discovered. Story 18. The scratching started subtly, a delicate whisper against the old cabin walls, easily dismissed as a restless branch in the autumnal wind. Easily dismissed as a restless branch in the autumnal wind. Eleanor, however, found it unsettling. She'd sought refuge in the isolated cabin, a haven against the incessant hum of city life, not a stage for some unseen, nocturnal drama. The cabin, inherited from a distant aunt she'd never met, was nestled deep within a sprawling, ancient forest in the heart of Maine. It was charmingly rustic, smelling of pine and damp earth, with a crackling fireplace that offered a comforting warmth against the encroaching chill of late October. The nearest town was a good 20-minute drive down winding, unlit roads, a fact Eleanor had initially relished, but now felt like a chilling isolation. The scratching persisted. It wasn't the rhythmic scraping of branches. This was deliberate, insistent, like tiny claws dragging against wood. Eleanor, the pragmatic architect, tried to rationalize. Mice, perhaps? Squirrels nesting in the eaves. But the sound seemed to move, tracing the perimeter of the cabin, a constant, unsettling companion to the silence of the woods. The second night, the scratching intensified. It was no longer a whisper, but a distinct fingernail on chalkboard irritation that grated on Eleanor's nerves. She'd taken to sleeping with the bedside lamp on, the pale glow offering a small, inadequate shield against the unknown. She tried banging on the walls, hoping to scare away whatever creature was causing the disturbance. But the scratching would simply pause, a pregnant silence hanging in the air, before resuming its relentless circuit. Then came the whispers. At first, she thought it was the wind, a low murmur, just at the edge of hearing. But the windows were sealed tight, the wind outside a gentle sigh, not the hushed, sibilant sounds that seemed to seep from the very walls of the cabin. She started to question her sanity. Exhaustion, perhaps? The isolation playing tricks on her mind? One evening, as she sat by the fire, the scratching spiraled into a frenzy. It sounded like something was trying to claw its way in. Panic flared in her chest. She grabbed the heavy poker from the hearth, heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. She pressed her ear against the wall, trying to pinpoint the source. And that's when she heard it clearly. A whisper. Her name, breathed directly on the other side of the aged wood. Eleanor. The voice was thin, reedy, almost childlike, yet laced with an undercurrent of something ancient and malevolent. She recoiled, dropping the poker with a clang that echoed through the silent cabin. She backed away from the wall, eyes wide with terror. This wasn't her imagination. This was real. Sleep became a luxury. She spent her nights huddled by the fire, the poker clutched in her trembling hand, listening to the scratching, the whispers, the growing sense of dread that settled like a shroud around her. She tried calling for help, but the cell service was non-existent in the remote location. The landline was dead, its wires likely severed by the vagaries of time and neglect. She was truly alone, days blurred into nights. The scratching intensified, sometimes morphing into a frantic scraping, as if something large and desperate was trying to break through. The whispers became more frequent, more personal. They spoke of things she'd forgotten, dredged up childhood fears and insecurities, weaving a tapestry of paranoia around her. One afternoon, while exploring the dusty attic, she found an old, leather-bound journal. It belonged to her great-aunt Elara. As she carefully turned the brittle pages, a chilling story unfolded. Elara had written of similar experiences in the cabin, of the scratching, the whispers, and a growing fear of something unseen that dwelled within the walls. Elara's entries grew increasingly desperate, filled with accounts of sleepless nights, frantic attempts to cleanse the cabin with salt and prayers, and a growing conviction that she was being haunted by a malevolent entity tied to the land itself. The final entry was chillingly brief. It knows my name now. There is no escape. Eleanor's blood ran cold. The journal confirmed her worst fears. She wasn't just imagining things. She was trapped in a nightmare that had claimed her ancestor. Armed with this horrifying knowledge, Eleanor knew she couldn't simply wait to become another victim. She had to fight back. She spent the next day barricading the windows and doors, reinforcing them with furniture, creating a makeshift fortress against the unseen threat. That night, the scratching started earlier, more aggressive than ever before. It was accompanied by a low, guttural growl that vibrated through the floorboards. The whispers were incessant, a chorus of voices murmuring her name, taunting her, promising her demise. Suddenly, the scratching focused on the front door. The old wood splintered and cracked under the unseen assault. Eleanor gripped the poker, her knuckles white, her breath catching in her throat. She knew with a chilling certainty that whatever was outside was about to get in. A section of the door splintered inwards, revealing a sliver of darkness. Then, a long, skeletal finger, impossibly pale and thin, snaked through the opening. Eleanor screamed, a raw, primal sound, born of pure terror. The finger curled, its nail long and sharp, scraping against the wood. More fingers followed, then a hand, impossibly contorted, reaching. Grasping, Eleanor swung the poker, connecting with a sickening thud. The hand recoiled, but the assault didn't stop. The creature, or whatever it was, threw its weight against the door. The old hinges groaning in protest. Eleanor braced herself against the opposite wall, pushing with all her might, trying to hold it back. The whispers intensified, a cacophony of voices urging her to give up, to let it in. Suddenly, the scratching stopped. The growling ceased. The whispers fell silent. An unnerving quiet descended upon the cabin, heavier and more terrifying than any noise. Eleanor held her breath, listening, every nerve on high alert. Then, a new sound emerged. It was a soft, rhythmic tapping, coming from the ceiling above her. Slow, deliberate, like footsteps in an empty room. Eleanor slowly raised her gaze, her heart hammering against her ribs. A dark stain began to spread across the ceiling, directly above her. It oozed slowly, dripping down like thick, black tar. The musty smell of the cabin was replaced by a nauseatingly sweet, cloying odor that made her gag. A single drop of the black liquid landed on her forehead. It felt cold, like ice, burning her skin. She recoiled, wiping it away, her fingers trembling. The tapping continued, growing louder, closer. The stain on the ceiling expanded, taking on a vaguely humanoid shape. Two dark indentations appeared, like empty sockets. Eleanor realized, with a dawning horror, that it wasn't trying to break in through the door. It was already inside. It had been above her all along. The shape on the ceiling shifted, and a long, thin neck craned downwards. The head, if it could be called that, hanging upside down, its empty sockets staring directly at her. The whispers returned, not as a chorus now, but as a single voice, right above her head, impossibly close. "Welcome home, Eleanor." A long, skeletal arm descended from the ceiling, reaching for her. Eleanor screamed again, a sound that was abruptly cut short as the cold, bony fingers closed around her throat. The scratching stopped. The whispers ceased. The cabin fell silent once more. The only sound of the gentle crackling of the fire, oblivious to the horror that had transpired. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying no trace of Eleanor's final, desperate cry. The ancient woods held their secrets close, and the cabin stood silent, waiting for its next unsuspecting guest. Story 19. I had come back to this place after years, drawn by a sense of duty, or perhaps a twisted nostalgia. The house loomed over me, its once vibrant paint now peeling and faded, as if the very structure were wilting under the weight of memories. Shadows danced in the corners of my vision, making me question whether I was truly alone. "Just get it over with," I muttered to myself, stepping across the threshold. The door creaked open with a mournful wail, and I felt as if the house was exhaling after a long-held breath. Dust motes floated lazily in the dim light, and as I stepped inside, a chill ran down my spine. This was not just a house. It was a mausoleum of my past. I moved through the darkened hallways, each step echoing the silence. My heart raced, pounding like a drum in my chest. I could almost hear my mother's laughter, a haunting melody that had once filled these rooms. "It's just your imagination," I whispered, trying to convince myself. But as I reached the living room, the air thickened, pressing against my skin. A flash of movement caught my eye. I turned sharply, but nothing was there. Just the old rocking chair, swaying slightly, as if a ghostly presence had just vacated. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "Okay, maybe I'm a little jumpy," I said aloud, hoping the sound of my own voice would chase away the encroaching dread. I moved to the fireplace, where a layer of ash lay undisturbed. Memories flooded back. My father's warm hands as he taught me to light a fire. The crackling flames that danced like spirits in the night. "Why'd you leave me?" I whispered to the empty room, the silence screaming back at me. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the kitchen, sending a jolt of adrenaline coursing through me. "What the hell?" I gasped, my breath hitching in my throat. I crept toward the sound, the floorboards creaking beneath my feet like old bones, protesting my intrusion. As I approached the kitchen, the air grew colder, biting at my skin. I peered around the corner, my heart racing. The pantry door stood ajar, swinging slightly as if inviting me in. "Hello," I called, my voice wavering. No response, just the sound of the wind outside, howling like a banshee. I took a step forward, and the door swung open with a bang, revealing shelves lined with jars of preserved fruits and vegetables, all dust-covered and forgotten. I felt a strange compulsion to enter, but a whisper in my mind warned me to turn back. Instead, I reached for a jar, its glass cool against my fingers, and suddenly, a loud thump echoed from behind me. I spun around, breathless. "Who's there?" I demanded, my voice stronger than I felt. The only answer was silence, thick and oppressive. Then, a low moan drifted from the shadows, sending chills racing down my spine. "Help me," the voice echoed, soft yet heavy with despair. I hesitated, my instincts screaming at me to run. But curiosity held me in place. "Hello?" I called, my voice barely above a whisper. "Help me," the moan came again. Clearer this time. It was followed by a soft thud, like something heavy hitting the floor. I took a step back, my heart hammering, but another thud echoed, this time accompanied by a faint cry. "Please." I couldn't leave. Not now. I edged forward, the shadows creeping closer as I approached the source of the sound. "I'm coming," I said, though doubt gnawed at my resolve. The kitchen light flickered, casting erratic shadows that danced around me. As I reached the doorway, I turned to find the source of the voice. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Help me," the voice pleaded again, sounding more desperate, more pained. I stepped into the kitchen, my breath hitching in my throat as I saw the figure huddled in the corner. A woman, her hair matted and dark, her clothes tattered and stained. "Who are you?" I breathed, struggling to form words as I backed away. "Please, don't leave me," she gasped, her eyes wide with terror. "They'll come for you too." "Who will?" I pressed, my heart racing as I glanced at the windows, half expecting to see something lurking outside. "The ones who took me." Her voice trailed off, and she shivered violently, clutching her knees to her chest. I could see the raw fear on her face, and for a moment, I felt a pang of empathy. "Why are you here?" I asked, inching closer, despite every instinct telling me to run. "Trapped, bound to this place," she whispered, her gaze darting around the room as if expecting someone to burst through the door. "You have to get out before they come back." "Who?" I pressed, desperate for answers. "Those who feed on fear," she said, her voice trembling. "They're drawn to this house. They'll take you like they took me." My heart raced, and I felt the urge to flee. But I was rooted to the spot. "I can't just leave you," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "What do I do?" "Find the mirror," she urged, her eyes wide and pleading. "It's the only way, but you have to hurry. They'll be here soon." I glanced around the room, and my eyes fell on the large, ornate mirror hanging above the sink, its surface clouded with age. "The mirror," I echoed, my pulse quickening. "Yes, it will show you the truth, but you must be careful. They will try to trick you," she warned, her voice a frantic whisper. "Trick me?" I asked, fear creeping into my voice. "What do you mean?" "Just trust your instincts," she said, her voice fading. "Don't let them in." Before I could respond, the shadows in the room deepened, swirling and coiling around her like a suffocating blanket. "No!" I shouted, lunging forward, but it was too late. She dissolved into the darkness, her scream echoing in my ears as the shadows consumed her. I stumbled back, panic gripping me. "Get out!" I shouted at myself, turning toward the door, but then I hesitated, my gaze drawn to the mirror. It glimmered faintly, a beacon amidst the chaos. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. I can't leave her, I murmured, my resolve hardening. I stepped toward the mirror, my reflection hazy and distorted. Show me the truth, I demanded, my voice steady despite the dread pooling in my stomach. The glass rippled, and my reflection twisted into something grotesque. I saw flashes of darkness, figures lurking just beyond the edges of my vision. Helpless, they whispered, their voices a chorus of despair. Join us! No! I cried, recoiling. I felt the air thicken, pressing down on me like a weight. The shadows clawed at the edges of my vision, whispering promises of power, of release. You can't have me. Join us. The voices echoed again, more insistent this time. I clenched my fists, focusing on the woman's face. Her terrified eyes. I will not be a part of this, I shouted, and suddenly a surge of energy pulsed through me. The mirror shimmered, and the figures writhed, their faces twisting in rage. Leave her, I screamed, and with a final burst of will, I hurled my anger at the mirror. The surface shattered, glass exploding outward like 1,000 stars, and the shadows screamed, their voices merging into a cacophony of rage. I stumbled back, gasping for breath as the darkness writhed and twisted around me. The woman's face appeared briefly, a grateful smile breaking through her fear. Thank you, she whispered, before fading into the light. The kitchen erupted in chaos as the shadows dissipated, the air growing lighter with each passing moment. I fell to my knees, breathless, the adrenaline coursing through me. I had faced the darkness and emerged victorious. But as I looked around the kitchen, the remnants of the horror still lingered. The house felt different now, the oppressive weight of fear lifting. But a new challenge awaited me. The memories would always be there, but I had reclaimed my power. With a deep breath, I stood, dusting off my knees. I'm not afraid anymore, I declared to the empty room. And as I stepped back into the light, I knew I would never return to this place again. But I would carry its lessons with me, ready to face whatever darkness lay ahead. Story 20. The Wind. An angry beast clawed at the dilapidated cabin, nestled deep within the skeletal fingers of the winter forest. Snow, a relentless white shroud, hammered against the warped window panes, each gust a whispered threat. Inside, Elias, a man etched with the worry lines of 1,000 sleepless nights, huddled closer to the dying embers in the hearth. The fire, mirroring his own dwindling hope, cast long, dancing shadows that contorted the familiar shapes of the room into monstrous figures. He hadn't meant to be here. A wrong turn on a logging trail, a sudden whiteout, and then the jarring crunch of his tires sliding into a snowdrift. His phone predictably had no signal. He'd spent the last 2 days rationing his meager supplies, hoping for a break in the weather. But the storm only intensified, its fury a lonely symphony of despair. The cabin itself felt older than time, its timbers groaning under the weight of years and neglect. A palpable chill permeated the air, far colder than the outside temperature suggested. It seeped into his bones, a constant, insistent ache that no amount of fire could banish. It started subtly, a whispering at the periphery of his hearing, like dry leaves skittering across a forgotten path. He dismissed it as the wind, the old house settling, tricks of the weary mind. But the whispers persisted, growing clearer, almost forming words. Though he couldn't quite grasp their meaning, they seemed to slither from the walls themselves, from the darkness that clung to the corners of the room like a living thing. One evening, as the last vestiges of daylight bled from the sky, the whispers coalesced. They were no longer indistinct murmurs. but a chorus of hushed voices, all speaking at once. A cacophony of sorrow and something else. Something darker, more malevolent. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through Elias's stoicism. He clapped his hands over his ears, but the voices were inside his head now, a relentless torment. He began seeing things in the shadows, flickering shapes that weren't truly there, fleeting glimpses of movement just beyond the edge of his vision. A tall, gaunt figure standing at the foot of his bed when he woke with a start, only to vanish when he blinked. A child's pale face peering from behind a tattered curtain, its eyes black and empty. Sleep became a luxury he could no longer afford. Every time he closed his eyes, the whispers intensified, morphing into screams, accusations, pleas. He'd jerk awake, heart pounding. The room plunged into an oppressive silence that felt even more terrifying than the noise. He tried to find some semblance of normalcy, some way to ground himself in reality. He explored the cabin during the brief lulls in the storm, hoping to find supplies, anything. The downstairs consisted of the main room, with its decaying fireplace, a small cluttered kitchen, and a locked door that wouldn't budge, its aged wood scarred with deep, inexplicable scratches. Upstairs, a narrow, creaking staircase led to 2 small bedrooms, both barren and filled with an unsettling stillness. In one of the bedrooms, under a loose floorboard, he found a small, leather-bound journal. Its pages were yellowed and brittle, the ink faded but still legible. It chronicled the final days of a family who had lived in the cabin generations ago. Their entries spoke of a growing unease, of noises in the night, of a creeping dread that consumed them. The last entry, scrawled in frantic handwriting, simply read, "It wants sin." Elias's blood ran cold. The journal confirmed his deepest fears. He wasn't just trapped in a storm. He was trapped in something far more sinister. The activity escalated. Objects moved on their own. A chipped teacup flew across the kitchen, shattering against the wall. The shadows danced with a frantic energy, their shapes becoming more defined, more grotesque. He started talking to himself, rationalizing, trying to convince himself it was the isolation, the lack of sleep, the stress, but deep down, a primal terror was taking hold. One night, the scratching at the locked door downstairs intensified, a frantic, relentless scraping that sent shivers down his spine. It sounded like fingernails dragging across wood, desperate and insistent. He barricaded the bedroom door with a heavy oak dresser, his hands shaking. The scratching continued, growing louder, more desperate, accompanied by the whispers, which now seemed to emanate from the door itself. He pressed his ear against the wood, his breath held captive in his chest. He could hear a low, guttural growl mixed with the scratching, a sound that was not human, not animal, something ancient and hungry. Suddenly, the scratching stopped. The silence that followed was more terrifying than any noise. He held his breath, every muscle in his body tense, waiting. Then, a soft, wet thud against the door, followed by another and another. It sounded like something heavy, fleshy, being slammed against the wood. Panic seized him. He scrambled back from the door, his eyes darting around the room, searching for an escape. But there was none. The windows were sealed shut by the snow, the only exit the door he had just barricaded. The thuds continued, each one making the old door shudder. He could feel the vibrations through the floorboards, up his legs, into his very core. The whispers were back, louder now, no longer a chorus, but a single voice, close, intimate, speaking his name. Elias. It hissed, the sound like dry leaves crunching underfoot. "We know you're here." He backed away until he hit the wall, his heart hammering against his ribs. The voice was inside the room now, not coming from the door, but from everywhere and nowhere. At once, a cold spot descended upon him. The patch of absolute zero that made his teeth chatter. The shadows in the room writhed and twisted, coalescing into a shape in the corner, tall and gaunt. Just like the figure he had glimpsed before, its eyes, two pinpricks of red in the darkness, fixed on him. He tried to scream, but his throat was constricted. His voice trapped. He could only stare, paralyzed by fear, as the figure began to move, gliding across the floor, its footsteps making no sound. The voice whispered again, closer this time, right beside his ear. "You're not the first, Elias, and you won't be the last." He closed his eyes, bracing for the inevitable, the cold seeping into him, a numbing prelude to whatever horror awaited. He felt a hand, impossibly cold and skeletal, brush against his cheek. Suddenly a loud crack echoed through the cabin. He flinched, opening his eyes. The figure in the corner was gone. The voice was silent. The cold spot had vanished. He blinked, disoriented. Had it all been a nightmare? He looked around the room, his heart still pounding. The dresser was still barring the door. The room was dark and silent, save for the howling of the wind outside. He cautiously approached the door, his hand trembling as he reached for the handle. He pulled it open, expecting to see something. Anything. The hallway was empty. He crept downstairs, his senses on high alert. The scratching on the locked door had stopped. The air felt different, lighter, as if a heavy weight had been lifted. He approached the locked door, his curiosity warring with his fear. He tried the handle. It turned. The door creaked open, revealing a small, dusty room. There was nothing inside but cobwebs and the faint scent of damp earth. In the center of the room, etched into the wooden floorboards, were a series of crude symbols, swirling lines and unsettling geometric shapes. As he stared at the symbols, a wave of nausea washed over him. He recognized them from the journal. The family had written about them, about finding them carved into the walls, about the growing feeling of dread that followed their discovery. He understood now. The cabin wasn't just old. It was a vessel, a conduit. The entity he had encountered wasn't confined to the building. It was drawn to it, amplified by it, and these symbols were its anchor. The wind howled outside, and for a brief moment he thought he heard the whispers again, faint and distant. But they were gone as quickly as they came. He knew he couldn't stay. The storm might still be raging, but the true danger lay within the walls of the cabin, woven into its very fabric. He grabbed his backpack, his meager supplies, and stumbled out into the blinding snow, not knowing where he was going, but knowing he had to get away, to escape the silent, watchful presence that lingered within the ancient timbers. As he trudged through the deep snow, the cabin receding behind him, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. The silence of the forest was heavy, pregnant with unspoken threats, and somewhere, carried on the wind, he thought he heard a faint, chilling whisper, a promise of things to come. "You can't escape us, Elias. This place, it never truly lets go."